The choice illusion? Paradox. You walk through life making choices. Which career to pursue, which person to love, what to wear, what to believe, what to fight for. You weigh your options, consult your heart, and take pride in the feeling of agency. In each fork in the road, you feel the pulse of freedom, the sense that your life is a product of your decisions. But what if that freedom is only the illusion of choice? What if, in reality, every path you choose was paved for you by invisible hands, by families, cultures, authorities, and forces you never see? This is the choice illusion paradox. You feel free as you choose, but who built the paths, and who taught you which ones are even acceptable to want? This paradox is woven into the fabric of modern life. We are raised to idolize the act of choosing. Follow your dreams. Be yourself. Pick your destiny. Advertisers promise endless options, hundreds of channels, dozens of flavors, infinite scroll. Politicians offer rival slogans. Companies give you brands to love or boycott. Dating apps present a carousel of faces. The menu is wide, but the kitchen is hidden. You are free to choose what is offered, but rarely to imagine what lies beyond. Philosophers have long warned us of this trap. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the tendency to mistake compliance for freedom, to pick from a list handed down by others and call it self-determination. Herbert Marcuse called it repressive desublimation. The way modern societies seduce us with choices that change nothing fundamental, keeping us too distracted to demand more. The 20th century social scientist Erich Fromm argued that the anxiety of too many meaningless choices pushes us toward conformity, not liberation. The paradox is not just philosophical, it is embedded in our psychology. Studies show that people feel more satisfied when they believe they have chosen, even if their options are arbitrary or rigged. In classic experiments, participants asked to pick between nearly identical items later convinced themselves that their choice was uniquely theirs, rationalizing differences that barely existed. Marketers exploit this bias, giving us just enough illusion to keep us buying, voting, consuming, while the real rules remain untouched. History is full of engineered choices. In colonial societies, conquered peoples were told they could choose between collaborating with the new regime or facing violence, an impossible dilemma, but one that disguised coercion as agency. In authoritarian states, citizens may be offered elections, but only between pre-approved candidates, with forbidden parties banned and dangerous ideas erased from the ballot. The ritual of choosing is preserved, its substance is hollowed out. But the most pervasive form of the choice illusion, paradox, is subtler. It lives in culture, language, even in the dreams we dare to have. From childhood, we are nudged, guided, and sometimes shoved down particular tracks. Boys don't cry. Girls should be nurturing. Success means money, status, achievement. These messages aren't written in law, but they shape which desires feel legitimate and which are banished as foolish or shameful. By the time you are old enough to make choices, the invisible hands have already narrowed your field of vision. You don't even notice the paths that are missing. Ask yourself, which of your choices felt like rebellion, but were secretly encouraged by a subculture, a trend, a friend group eager for you to fit in? Which preferences do you claim as your own, but trace back to marketing campaigns, family legacies, or ancient taboos? Even our taste in art, love, and morality is shaped by centuries of stories handed down, by what is celebrated and what is censored. Education systems reinforce this paradox. You may choose your field of study, but only from subjects that the school or nation deems worthy. You are told to find your passion, but only within the boundaries of what will be graded, tested, or monetized. Those who wander too far off the map are dismissed as dreamers, rebels, or failures, reminders of the limits we rarely question. The workplace, too, is a maze of false options. You may be given multiple career tracks, opportunities for growth, or different roles to try, but the structure itself, the hierarchy, the goals, the very idea of what work is for, remains non-negotiable. You are free to climb, but only within the cage. Even revolutions are not immune. History shows that movements promising liberation often replace one set of choices with another, enforcing new orthodoxies and punishing dissent in the name of freedom. The cycle repeats, the illusion of choice, the reality of constraint. The paradox becomes most painful when you realize how deeply it shapes your sense of self. You may reach a crossroads, feeling restless or unsatisfied, and blame yourself for choosing wrongly. But what if the problem isn't the path you picked, but the paths that were missing all along? What if you inherited a map drawn by hands you never saw and called it destiny? Escaping the choice illusion paradox is not simple. It begins with awareness, a radical curiosity about the origins of your desires, the construction of your options, the stories that justify them. Ask, who benefits from me choosing between these options? What choices were never offered? Who told me what is acceptable to want? True autonomy starts with questioning the question itself. Therapists and philosophers suggest practicing meta-choice, the act of examining not just what you choose, but why you choose, and whether the range itself is enough. It means learning to imagine new paths, to build your own map, to honor desires that don't fit any ready-made menu. It also means forgiving yourself for past choices, for not knowing the full game, for living within invisible walls. The paradox is not a personal failing, but a shared human predicament, a system designed to keep us busy, compliant, and content with crumbs of agency. So, next time you are presented with a menu of options by a politician, a parent, a partner, a company, or even yourself, pause and look beyond the list. Ask what's missing. Ask whose voice shaped the menu. And above all, ask what you truly want, beyond what you have been told to want. Real freedom is not just picking from the paths built by others. It is the slow, brave work of naming the cage, tearing down the fences, and discovering which desires are truly yours. Because the most dangerous illusion is not that you lack choice, but that you are already as free as you could possibly be. The predetermined preference trap. We love to believe our choices are ours, that we are the architects of our desires, that our favorite foods, the people we love, the music we crave, the ambitions we chase, all arise from some hidden core, some irreducible essence called me. But look closer, and the illusion begins to tremble. The taste for coffee instead of tea, the comfort you find in rainy days, the thrill of a risky idea or the solace of routine. How much of that did you ever truly choose? This is the predetermined preference trap, where freedom feels absolute, yet almost every preference has been quietly sculpted by forces outside your reach. Start with your genes. Long before you learned to speak, your DNA had already decided parts of your taste buds, your tolerance for bitterness, your sensitivity to loud sounds, even the probability of your future addictions or aversions. Are you drawn to spicy food, repelled by cilantro, or soothed by a minor chord in a song? In your cells, there are switches flipped and levers pulled by ancestors you never met. When you say, "That's just who I am," you're echoing a chorus written long before you entered the stage. But genetics is just the overture. Childhood arrives, and with it, the subtle sculpting of preference by accident, routine, and culture. Maybe you loved books because someone read to you at bedtime, or maybe you hated them because reading was punishment. Perhaps you fear dogs because you were bitten at 4, or you adore them because one slept at your feet during nightmares. Your sense of what's beautiful, what's comforting, what's possible. These are hand-me-downs, stitched together from the scraps of early life, family rituals, passing fads, and the random distribution of opportunity and trauma. Even the preferences you cling to most stubbornly, your favorite color, the food that tastes like home, the scent that calms or excites you, are echoes of early, often forgotten moments. Psychologists call this imprinting, when brief windows of experience set preferences for years to come. The brain, eager to predict and survive, latches onto whatever works, and repeats it until it feels like destiny. Zoom out further, and the trap closes. Your preferences are funneled by the world you landed in: geography, culture, class, the tides of technology and history. You might be a die-hard fan of spicy noodles, but only because you grew up where chilies were everywhere and pasta was rare. You might crave the comfort of silence, but only because your home was noisy and quiet became a form of safety. Even your most original tastes are shaped by what was available, what was praised, what was possible. The person who prefers jazz over pop, or solitude over parties, or art over sport, each preference is as much a map of circumstance as of self. So when you choose, what are you really choosing? You say yes to what feels good and no to what feels wrong. But the feelings themselves were planted, watered, and pruned by countless hands you never saw. You take pride in your passions, your quirks, your unique identity. Yet every road you travel was first built by chance, biology, and the biases of the people who raised you. Even rebellion is part of the trap. Maybe you define yourself by what you reject, your parents' music, your culture's values, your generation's rules. But what you resist, what you turn from, is still determined by the shape of what you inherited. The teenager who despises authority is still dancing with the idea of authority, shaped by the very thing they hope to escape. Neuroscience drives the point deeper. Our brains are wired to seek out familiar patterns, to favor the safe, the known, the rewarded. The more often you choose something, the stronger the neural pathway becomes. Preferences are habits, and habits are grooves dug by repetition, chance, and reward. Over time, the groove becomes a canyon. You call it choice, but your mind is simply following the path of least resistance, the well-worn trail left by a million moments you didn't select. Think about love. We fall in love, not with the most logical person, but with those who trigger something ancient, something shaped by childhood, by wounds and hopes, and the smells and sounds of earliest memory. We call it fate, or chemistry, or magic. But underneath, it's 1,000 small signals: tone of voice, body language, the way someone listens or looks away, each filtered through a lens built by genes, by past loves and losses, by fleeting experiences you've already forgotten. And yet, despite all this, you feel free. You feel your preferences burning inside, urgent and true. When you stand in front of two doors, coffee or tea, stay or leave, speak or stay silent, you feel the weight of decision. You agonize, you deliberate, you say yes or no, but step back, and you realize your decision was nudged, colored, constrained by the preferences that shaped you long before the choice appeared. You feel like the author, but you are often reading lines written in invisible ink, penned by hands that vanished long ago. Does this mean there is no self, no freedom, no room for originality? Not exactly. It means that selfhood is stranger, more layered, more entangled with the world than we like to admit. Your you is not a single sovereign decider, but a mosaic of influences, patterns, and echoes. Some ancient, some recent, some accidental, some willed. Real freedom, if it exists, lies not in choosing as if from nowhere, but in seeing the trap, noticing the invisible hands, and sometimes, just sometimes, stepping off the script. You can pause and ask, why do I want this? Whose voice do I hear in my preferences? Am I hungry? Or am I just following the groove? In rare, clear moments, you might reach for something utterly new, or question an old taste, or break a habit just to see who you are without it. These moments don't erase the trap, but they widen it, allowing a shaft of light, a glimmer of self-awareness, a sense of agency born not from ignorance, but from understanding. So, next time you choose, honor your preferences, but also question them. Be grateful for the strange, tangled path that brought you here. But don't be afraid to wonder what part was truly you. The trap is real, but so is your capacity to see it. And in that seeing, perhaps, is the beginning of a deeper kind of freedom. A freedom not from your preferences, but from the illusion that you ever chose them alone. The actor's script dilemma. You step onto the stage the moment you're born. There is no rehearsal, no chance to peek behind the curtain or negotiate your first lines. The audience is already there. Parents, relatives, ancestors, even strangers who will shape your world. Before you can even speak, the scenery is set. The language you will hear, the faces you will trust or fear, the rituals and stories that will teach you what is real. You're told you can be anything you want, but the stage, the props, the lighting, even the script itself, these were chosen for you, piece by piece, long before you could claim a single choice as your own. At first, it feels like play. You try out voices, imitate the characters you see, you repeat the lines whispered to you by caretakers, mimicking their joys and sorrows, their prejudices and hopes. You laugh on cue, cry when expected, learn which stories win applause and which draw the curtain of silence. The world rewards the lines delivered with conviction, punishes those that stray too far from the script. Soon, improvisation becomes risky. You start to sense, even before you can name it, that certain thoughts are dangerous, certain feelings must be hidden, certain dreams belong only to the shadows. Psychologists call it social conditioning. You learn not just from what you're taught, but from what is modeled, what is punished, what is never spoken aloud. If you grew up in a house where anger was met with icy silence, you learned to hide your rage, perhaps even from yourself. If laughter was the only permitted rebellion, you became a clown, cracking jokes to diffuse the tension, to win a moment of safety. Even your preferences, the food you crave, the colors you love, the way you walk, are shaped by the echo of invisible directors. The dilemma sharpens as you grow. You are told you are the author of your life, that you can improvise your own destiny, but every move is constrained by the shape of the stage, the glare of the lights, the weight of props handed to you by others. Your choices are real, but the menu was printed before you arrived. You choose your lines, but the script is heavy with generations of revision. The world says be yourself, but never explains how to find the self beneath the layers of costume and cue. Think about how you respond under pressure. When the lights are hottest, do you stand tall or shrink? When someone challenges your story, do you defend, improvise, or fall silent? Each reaction is both unique and borrowed, drawn from a library of scripts you never consciously chose. The gestures of comfort, the habits of retreat, the sudden flare of pride or shame, all are echoes of performances you watched and absorbed before you could speak your own mind. Culture, too, is a playwright. National myths, family legends, ancient grievances, all script your beliefs about what is possible, what is forbidden, what is sacred. If you come from a lineage of survivors, you may live always on edge, rehearsing for disasters that never arrive. If your culture worships achievement, your script demands relentless striving, even when your soul aches for rest. If your people have always been outsiders, your lines are tinged with suspicion, resilience, or longing for home. And yet, you improvise, every day, in 1,000 small ways. You riff on your lines, break character, forget your cues. Sometimes, you shock the audience. Sometimes, you surprise even yourself. These are moments of raw, unscripted life, flashes of truth that break through the choreography of habit. Maybe you speak out when silence was expected, or choose kindness where cruelty was tradition. For a moment, you are more than your role. You are alive, present, fiercely your own. But the dilemma remains. How much of what you call you was handed down by those who wrote the script before you? How often do you question the stage itself, the stories, the lighting, the props? Or do you, like so many before you, inherit the drama, reciting the lines that keep the play moving, afraid to leave the comfort of the familiar stage for the darkness beyond? It takes courage to notice the boundaries, to ask, who wrote these lines I speak? Who chose this scenery? Who taught me what stories deserve an encore, and which are cut from the play? Some people rebel, rewrite the script, build new stages, invite new actors to join. Others become master improvisers, bending the old lines to their will, finding moments of freedom in the space between words. But most drift between roles, unsure when the performance ends and life begins, haunted by the suspicion that they are only echoing voices from the past. Science shows us the dilemma is real. Epigenetics reveals how trauma, habit, and hope can be passed down through generations, scripting even your body's responses to stress or joy. Neurology shows how patterns of thought, set in childhood, become grooves in the brain, habits so deep they feel like destiny. But the human mind is also wired for invention. New experiences, new relationships, new acts of courage can rewrite even the oldest scripts, change the ending of stories told for centuries. The stage is set, but the play is not finished. You can step to the edge of the lights, peer into the darkness, and ask, what happens if I forget my lines? What if I walk off stage, or invite others to improvise with me? Who will I be when the script runs out? The world may respond with confusion, even hostility. The audience may boo or fall silent, but sometimes they will rise to their feet, awed by the honesty of a life lived without a script. The actor's script dilemma is not a flaw. It is the starting point of freedom. You may never escape the stage, never shed every costume, never forget all the lines whispered to you before you were born. But you can notice. You can choose which lines to speak, which roles to refuse, which stories to pass on. You can improvise, not to please the crowd, but to find out who you really are, beneath the applause and the glare. One day the lights will dim, the play will end, and the audience will disperse. The only question that will matter is, did you ever dare to improvise, even for a moment, and taste the life that was waiting behind the script. The locked door of freedom. You are told from the very start that you are free. Free to dream, to speak, to choose your path. You grow up surrounded by the language of freedom. Posters on the walls, stories in school books, hymns and slogans that praise the open road, the unlocked gate, the limitless horizon. You feel the ache of possibility in your chest. The world is vast, they say, and you are the architect of your own destiny. But soon you notice the boundaries. At first, they are gentle, even loving. Rules meant to keep you safe, to help you grow. Don't touch the stove. Don't talk to strangers. Don't run into the street. These are the first walls, and you accept them without question. They are for your own good, and the trust is easy. But as you grow older, the walls change shape. Some are built with words, expectations, warnings, traditions. Some are woven from silence, from glances exchanged above your head, from the invisible scripts handed down by family, culture, faith. You learn which dreams are welcome and which are forbidden, which desires are safe to speak and which must stay hidden. Every time you move, you feel for the walls. You are told, again and again, that you are free to choose. But the menu is limited, and the choices are marked with invisible ink. You are free to move, within walls you didn't build, toward goals you didn't choose, with thoughts you didn't author. At every turn, you find doors that are locked, paths that are fenced off, corridors that loop back on themselves. The boundaries are so familiar, so quietly enforced, that you stop noticing them. You start to believe that the space inside is all there is. You make decisions, but the logic behind them is inherited. You follow dreams, but they are dreams you were taught to want. You believe, with fierce conviction, in stories written long before you were born. The language of freedom becomes a script for obedience. You learn to decorate your cell, to call it home, to praise the beauty of your narrow view. You may even defend your prison, mocking those who yearn for more, judging those who stray too far. Sometimes, you feel a strange restlessness, a sense that something is missing, that the world is bigger than you've been allowed to see. You push at the boundaries, but the resistance is subtle. Maybe you're discouraged with a joke, a warning, a look of disappointment. Maybe you feel shame for wanting more, for questioning what you're supposed to accept. The fear is that, if you keep pushing, you'll lose the comfort of belonging. And so, you learn to stop at the locked door. This isn't just about cults or authoritarian societies. It happens in ordinary families, in classrooms, in companies, in nations. The walls are built from tradition, expectation, and fear. The locked doors are policed by approval and rejection, praise and punishment, love withheld and love bestowed. You become expert at reading the signs, knowing when to speak and when to be silent, when to reach and when to retreat. Sometimes the illusion is so complete that you celebrate your constraints. You call your cage order, purpose, faith. You teach your children to stay inside the lines, and you fear for them if they wander. You may even forget, for a while, that there is anything beyond the locked door. Yet, deep inside, the longing persists. In rare moments, late at night, in dreams, in flashes of memory, you recall the wildness of your first desires, the taste of forbidden questions. You remember what it felt like to want without shame, to imagine without limits, to move before the world handed you a map. For a heartbeat, you wonder what would happen if you turned the handle, if you pushed just a little harder. But then the doubt returns. The locked door is there for a reason, you tell yourself. Freedom is dangerous. Curiosity is reckless. Better to stay inside, where it's safe. But the price of safety is your true self. Every wall, every locked door, every borrowed thought shrinks you a little more. You become the caretaker of your own limitations. The jailer who polishes the bars and calls them gold. You repeat the stories, defend the rules, pass them down to others, until you almost believe them. Almost. There are those who find the courage to push through, to ask, who built these walls, and why should I obey? Sometimes the answer is silence. Sometimes it's anger or exile. But every time someone rattles the door, the illusion cracks. You begin to notice the lies you inherited, the fears that were never yours, the dreams you never truly owned. You start to listen for the quiet voice inside, the voice that remembers a wider sky, a wilder hope, a freedom not given, but claimed. True freedom is not the absence of walls, but the courage to question who built them. It is not the comfort of moving within a cage, but the risk of seeking the world beyond it. It is not obedience to borrowed goals, but the struggle to find your own. The locked door freedom is easy, comforting, seductive. It asks nothing but your surrender. Real freedom is harder. It requires honesty, risk, and the willingness to be alone, at least at first. So, the next time you are praised for your choices, ask whose voice you're echoing. When you find yourself defending a boundary, ask who benefits from keeping it closed. When you feel the urge to shrink, to stay small, to call the cell a home, remember that the walls were never truly yours. Freedom is not the right to move within limits set by others, but the relentless, sometimes painful quest to discover what lies beyond the locked door. It is yours if you dare, and only you can turn the key. The thought that echoes. A thought enters your mind, a whisper, a question, an image so vivid it feels like a memory. You pause, unsettled. Did you summon this idea? Or did it arrive uninvited, slipping through the cracks of your attention, echoing in a voice that sounds eerily like your own? This is the enigma of consciousness. The boundary between what you create and what you merely receive is thinner than you ever imagined. The thought that echoes inside you, where does it truly begin? You'd like to believe you are the author of your mind, that your inner monologue is yours alone. You claim ownership of your decisions, your impulses, your daydreams and dreads. But if you listen closely, you start to notice the odd, unbidden thought, dark, strange, or out of character. It comes at the edge of sleep, in the middle of conversation, during moments of silence. What if I said the wrong thing? What if I swerved off this road? What if none of this is real? You recoil, sometimes in shame, sometimes in wonder. Why did your mind create that? Or did it? Neuroscience has a name for these phenomena: intrusive thoughts. They are common, universal, sometimes harmless, sometimes distressing. They burst into consciousness like static, fragments from the brain's vast library of memory, emotion, instinct, and suggestion. Psychologists say they are a feature, not a flaw, a side effect of the mind's restless scanning, its constant work of simulation and prediction. The mind throws up possibilities, scenarios, warnings, but the haunting question remains: who or what is doing the throwing? From a young age, your mind is shaped by forces outside your control. The voices of parents, teachers, friends, the scripts of media, the shadows of trauma, the rhythms of culture. Their words become your inner language. Their judgments become your reflexive doubts. Their hopes, fears, prejudices, all find echo in your inner world. Over time, these echoes become indistinguishable from your own voice. You think you are thinking, but sometimes you are only remembering, rehearsing, reciting what the world has planted inside you. In moments of stress or vulnerability, the boundary grows even fainter. Thoughts arrive with an urgency you can't explain. You're not good enough. Something terrible will happen. You have to keep control. Sometimes the thought feels like an order, other times like a warning, and still others, a temptation. The thought echoes, repeats, grows louder the more you try to silence it. You wonder, am I choosing this, or am I possessed by an idea I never wanted? Philosophers have wrestled with this riddle for centuries. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But even he could not say where thoughts come from, only that they prove the thinker exists. The Buddhists taught that the self is a river of impressions, constantly shifting, never truly owned. Psychoanalysts argued that your conscious mind is just the tip of an iceberg, with most thoughts rising up from the depths of the unconscious, shaped by memories you cannot access, desires you dare not admit. And yet, the world around you is full of people, institutions, and technologies trying to implant thoughts in your mind. Propaganda, advertising, algorithms, each is a subtle engineer, whispering suggestions until you mistake them for your own preferences. Buy this, fear that, desire this, distrust them. The more connected you become, the more permeable your mind is to these external echoes. You carry 1,000 voices, 1,000 scripts, and some days, it's hard to know which one belongs to you. But does it matter where a thought comes from? The difference is profound. If every thought is yours, then you are responsible for everything that passes through your mind. The shame, the fear, the stray cruelty, the hidden wish. But if thoughts can enter uninvited, then you are not defined by your mental echoes. You become a listener, a witness, sometimes a participant, sometimes a host. The task is not to silence the noise, but to discern which echoes deserve your attention and which can be released, unclaimed. Therapists teach mindfulness for this very reason. Not to banish thoughts, but to watch them without judgment, to notice their arrival, their tone, their origin. You begin to see that most thoughts are weather systems passing through. You did not summon the storm, but you can choose how to respond. You are not the echo, but the space in which it resonates. Still, the question lingers. Is there ever an original thought? Or are you the sum of everything you have ever heard, read, or felt? Some thinkers say true creativity is the remixing of echoes into new harmonies. Some mystics say the mind is a receiver, tuning into signals from realms unseen, the universe thinking itself through you. The answer is always elusive, always slipping away just as you seem to grasp it. So, the next time a thought knocks at the door of your mind, ask yourself, did I summon you, or did you arrive unbidden, a traveler in borrowed clothes? You may never know for sure, but you can choose what to do with the echo. Welcome it, question it, let it pass. You are not the prisoner of your thoughts, nor are you their absolute creator. You are the witness, the filter, the consciousness through which echoes pass. And sometimes, if you are lucky, become something new. The thought that echoes is not proof of your darkness, nor your genius. It is the sound of being alive in a world overflowing with voices, memories, and possibilities. Your mind is both a hall of mirrors and a bell tower, amplifying, reflecting, inviting, releasing. The echoes will keep coming, but so will the chance to decide every day which voice you will finally call your own. The mirror choice loop. You stand before a choice, any choice. Maybe it's trivial, what to wear, what to eat, what to say. Maybe it's monumental, who to love, where to live, whether to stay or go. Every decision feels like a mirror, reflecting your character, your values, your deepest self. You believe, as so many do, that choices shape identity, that freedom is found in the act of choosing. But look closer, and the mirror reveals a second reflection. The self that chooses is itself a product of earlier decisions, most of which you never made. The loop tightens, a paradoxical cycle where who you are shapes your choices, but who you are was shaped long before you began to choose. This is the mirror choice loop, a hall of reflections. Each decision an echo of forgotten causes, old scripts, silent influences. The more you search for the origin of your agency, the more you find yourself circling back. Your present self sculpted by past circumstances, your preferences shaped by 1,000 invisible hands. Psychologists and philosophers have long wrestled with this riddle. Existentialists say, you are what you choose. Neuroscientists respond, you choose as your brain has been wired, by genes, by upbringing, by random chance. Social scientists add, your choices are filtered by class, by culture, by history. And so, each choice you make is both an expression of freedom and a repetition of patterns set long ago, looping through time, tightening with each pass. Consider the most basic decisions of childhood. Did you choose the family you were born into, the language you learned, the schools you attended, the city whose streets shaped your imagination? These early scripts wrote the first chapters of your story, sketching the outlines of who you would become. Your values, honesty, ambition, kindness, defiance, were first modeled by others, absorbed before you could say yes or no. Even your sense of possibility was bounded by the worlds you saw as a child. As you grow older, the mirror grows more complex. You make choices to rebel or conform, to study or play, to trust or withdraw. But each choice arises from a self that was itself the product of earlier choices, earlier circumstances. Your circle of friends, the books you read, the risks you dared or avoided, all set the stage for the next round of decisions. At each turn, you are both the chooser and the chosen, a sculptor working with clay already half-shaped. Take a moment to trace one major decision in your life. Maybe you left home for a distant city, pursued a career, ended a relationship, took a leap of faith. It felt momentous, defining. But behind it, a web of influences, a conversation you overheard as a child, a teacher's praise or scorn, the accident of birth, a story you once read, a trauma you never asked for, your reasons, your impulses, your hopes. How many were truly yours? How many planted by others? How many baked into the bones of your being before you ever realized you could choose? Modern neuroscience reveals just how tangled the loop can be. Studies show that brain activity predicting a choice can occur seconds before you become consciously aware of making a decision. The conscious mind, proud of its autonomy, is often the last to know, a narrator spinning stories after the fact. The loop tightens. You choose, you justify, you reinforce the identity that made the choice, and on it goes. Culture and society reinforce the mirror. Be true to yourself, we are told. But what is this self? Is it the sum of your past choices? Or is it a shifting mosaic, patched together from memories, traumas, joys, and losses, all refracted through the lens of culture and expectation? When you stand at a crossroads, the self in the mirror is already crowded with the faces of everyone who shaped you. The mirror choice loop is not just a philosophical puzzle. It has real consequences. In moments of doubt, you may blame yourself for choices that feel inevitable in hindsight. You may feel pride or shame for paths you took, not realizing how little freedom you had in the moment. You may struggle to break free of patterns, only to find yourself circling back to old habits, old relationships, old fears. History, too, is shaped by the loop. Generations repeat the choices of their ancestors, sometimes in rebellion, sometimes in imitation. Family secrets, cultural traumas, social hierarchies, these echo through time, shaping the choices of people long after the original causes have faded from memory. The loop is intergenerational, a hall of mirrors stretching backward and forward through history. But if the loop is real, is freedom just an illusion? Are you doomed to repeat the patterns handed down by others, trapped in a cycle of selfhood and choice? Not entirely. Awareness is the first crack in the glass. To see the loop is to loosen its grip. When you realize how much of who you are was given to you, you gain the power to question, to disrupt, to imagine other ways of being. Therapists speak of reauthoring your story, becoming conscious of the scripts you inherited, choosing which to keep and which to discard. Philosophers invite us to radical self-examination. Why do I want what I want? Who benefits from my choices? What would I choose if I could step outside the loop, even for a moment? The mirror choice loop will never disappear. You will always be shaped by forces beyond your control, but you can become a more active participant, a mindful architect within the hall of mirrors. You can learn to spot the patterns, to pause before repeating them, to honor the pain and beauty of the self you didn't choose, and to take responsibility for the self you become, even when the lines are blurred. So, next time you stand before a decision, see yourself in the mirror. Ask, who am I right now? Who shaped me? Which part of this choice is truly mine, and which part was handed down, unexamined from the past? The loop will tighten, but with awareness, with compassion, and with courage, you may find just enough space to make a new kind of choice. One that honors the complexity of your story, while daring to write a line that is truly your own. The aimless arrow illusion. You're told to set a goal, find your purpose, aim true. The world applauds the determined, those who lock their gaze on a target and chase it without flinching. They tell you to find your passion, follow your dreams, make your mark. You picture yourself as an archer, feet planted, eyes steady, pulling the string of your life toward a chosen destiny. But pause for a moment. Really ask yourself, did you choose the arrow? Did you shape the bow? Did you even pick the target? Or did someone long ago hand you a direction and a smile and tell you that this is the only aim worth having? This is the aimless arrow illusion, the quiet lie that we are freely aiming when, in truth, most of us have never questioned where our arrow came from or who planted the bullseye in the first place. From childhood, the direction begins. Before you ever held your own dreams, others dreamed for you. Parents, teachers, culture, they whispered, sometimes shouted, what was good, what was worthy, what was success. Maybe they told you to become a doctor, a star, a saint. Maybe they only smiled wider when you talked about law school, but changed the subject when you mentioned painting. Slowly, subtly, they helped you notch the arrow, and you didn't even realize it. You start to run toward the target. College, marriage, promotions, followers, titles, whatever your culture framed as victory. And when you hit something close to the center, the world claps. "You did it," they say. But somewhere deep inside, you feel the silence after the applause, a quiet dissonance, a question too fragile to voice. But what if I never chose this aim? Psychologists call it introjected motivation, goals that feel like your own, but were actually planted by others. You internalize them so fully that they become indistinguishable from your own desires, but they don't nourish you. You achieve them and feel strangely empty, like drinking salt water when you thought it was wine. Think about it. A person trains for years to become a surgeon, only to realize they're more at peace sketching on napkins than saving lives in fluorescent rooms. Another dreams of fame, reaches the spotlight, and finds it lonelier than the shadows. A third builds a perfect family on paper, house, spouse, success, but lies awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why they feel like a ghost in their own life. These people are not failures. They are marksmen who hit the wrong target perfectly. The bow is another trap. Even if you choose your aim, you rarely choose your tools. Were you handed a bow that fits your hands? One tuned to your temperament, your energy, your strengths? Or were you given someone else's weapon, a rigid set of expectations, a template of how success should look, and told, this is what everyone uses? We are praised for perseverance, for pushing forward no matter what. But if you were given the wrong bow, or aiming at someone else's target, what good is endurance? A life lived in the wrong direction isn't noble just because it was difficult. And then, there's the path itself. Even if you think you chose your aim, did you ever stop to turn around? To look at the landscape you passed through, the other arrows you might have fired? Most of us don't. We're taught that changing direction means weakness, that uncertainty is a flaw. But what if the bravest thing you could do is lower the bow, step off the path, and ask, what do I actually want? That question is terrifying, because once you see the illusion, you can't unsee it. You begin to wonder, how many of my goals were inherited, not chosen? How many dreams were adaptations, responses to praise, survival, expectation, not expressions of my true nature? And yet, this realization isn't defeat, it's liberation. When you step back and ask who handed you the arrow, you reclaim the power to choose again. You might look at the target and realize it was never yours. You might drop the bow entirely and find a new way to live, a quieter art, a messier path, a rhythm that doesn't impress the crowd but finally feels like home. The illusion persists because it flatters the ego. Look how hard you've worked, look how far you've come, but effort doesn't prove alignment. Loyalty to the wrong target is still misdirection, and hitting it with precision doesn't make it yours. Sometimes, the ones who seem aimless are actually the most free. They wander, pause, reflect. They put down the bow, sit in the grass, and stare at the sky. They don't confuse stillness with failure. They know that missing the target might be the beginning of truth. You are not wrong for changing your aim. You are not weak for questioning the goal. You are not lost for wondering whether the path you're on is really yours. The illusion tells you to keep aiming no matter what. Wisdom whispers, stop, breathe, ask who gave you the bow. Because in the end, the most meaningful direction is not the one handed to you, but the one you carve, trembling and unsure, out of your own awareness, your own aliveness, your own truth. The moment you drop the illusion, the aimless arrow is not a failure, it is a beginning. The Originless will problem. You wake up one morning and make a choice. Maybe it's small, what to wear, what to eat, whether to call someone back. Or maybe it's a life-shifting moment, a move, a breakup, a leap of faith. And you feel it in your chest. This was your decision. No one made you. No one forced your hand. This is what we call free will, the feeling that you are the source, the beginning, the unmoved mover of your own life. But then the question creeps in. Where did that will begin? Why this choice and not another? What made you want what you wanted? Because if you follow the thread backward, if you pull on the string of that decision, you find something unsettling. Maybe you chose the salad because you wanted to be healthy. But why did you want that? Because of an article you read, a comment someone made, a fear that lives in your chest from years ago. Every desire has a parent. Every choice has a lineage. Behind every I want is a because. And the more you ask, the deeper you go, the darker it gets. What caused the cause that caused you? This is the originless will problem. If free will exists, where does it begin? Because in a universe built on cause and effect, on neurons and memories and molecules, there is no first spark without a spark before it, no thought without a chemical signal, no action without a chain of moments stretching endlessly backward. So, who or what started you? Neuroscience only sharpens the question. Experiments show that your brain begins preparing for a decision before you become aware of it. The signal to move, to act, to choose, shows up in your motor cortex milliseconds before you say, "I decided." Consciousness is not the commander, but the narrator, explaining decisions after they have already begun. You feel like the author, but you may be just the reader, reciting the story one page behind. And yet, you feel so real. Your choices feel like your own. You suffer for them, you celebrate them, you agonize over them in the dark. How can something feel so undeniably true and yet possibly be an illusion? The more you search for the origin of your will, the more it recedes into mist. Was it your upbringing, your genetics, the trauma that shaped your preferences, the language you speak, which limits what you can even think? Go deeper, and even the idea of you becomes hard to hold. Are you your memories, your emotions, your beliefs? All of those are inherited, shaped, suggested, edited by time and experience. If you strip away everything you didn't choose, your body, your birth, your instincts, your language, what is left? What is this will that claims to be free? Some philosophers say it's all an illusion, that free will is a comforting lie we tell ourselves to survive a mechanical universe, that we are complex puppets with just enough consciousness to suffer. Others claim that even if we can't find the origin, freedom still exists in how we respond, how we create meaning from the chains we were handed, that in the space between stimulus and response, something sacred still flickers, and still others suggest something stranger, that will is not a thing with an origin, but a process without one, that it doesn't begin, it simply flows, like a river that seems to have a source, but really comes from countless hidden springs, too small and too ancient to name. In this view, you are not the source, but the shape, not the spark, but the flame, burning in a particular pattern, casting light shaped by a million shadows. It's easy to despair here, to feel small, like a leaf floating down a stream you didn't choose. But maybe the point isn't to trace the stream back to its impossible beginning. Maybe the point is to feel the current and choose how you move with it, to steer, even if the river runs deep beneath you. Because even if your will has no origin, even if every desire was planted by something else, you still live it. You still wrestle with it. You still transform it through art, through kindness, through reflection. You may not be the architect of your first thought, but you are the curator of your next action. And perhaps that, too, is a kind of freedom. The originless will problem is not a flaw in the human mind. It is a mirror. It reflects the tension at the core of what it means to be conscious, to feel like the captain of a ship that was built without your knowledge, sailing through winds you cannot control. And yet, here you are, gripping the wheel, telling yourself stories, carving meaning from motion. So ask yourself, if you didn't choose your will, what now? If every choice is caused, does that make it meaningless or sacred? If you are the sum of everything that came before, does that diminish you or prove just how miraculous you truly are? Maybe the point is not to escape causality, but to awaken inside it. Not to be free from the chain, but to be the link that changes everything after. You may never find the first cause. You may never meet the version of yourself who truly began. But you can become the version who asks the question, who refuses to sleepwalk, who stands at the edge of the unknowable and says, I am here, I am aware, and even if I do not know who started me, I will decide who I become. The Clockwork self-trap. You look in the mirror and tell yourself you're free, that your choices are your own, that the words you speak, the paths you take, the person you've become, all of it is you, made by you, directed by something deep and true inside. But what if that's a lie? What if, beneath the skin, beneath the personality and memory and feeling, you are simply a machine? Intricate, yes, astonishingly complex, but still a machine. What if your every thought is the output of a clockwork brain, and your sense of freedom is just the illusion of gears spinning fast enough to feel spontaneous? This is the clockwork self-trap, the terrifying possibility that everything you are is bound by the rules of chemistry and physics, that your brain, no matter how mysterious it seems, obeys the same laws as a falling stone or a burning star. that every neuron fires because it must, that every decision, every dream, every fear was determined long before you were aware of it. At first, this sounds like science fiction, but it's not. Neuroscience is already mapping the circuitry of the self. Experiments have shown that your brain makes decisions before you're even aware of them. Researchers can predict, with startling accuracy, which button you'll press seconds before you consciously choose. Your thoughts emerge from electrical signals and chemical gradients. Your emotions are patterns of activation in specific regions. Memory, desire, guilt. These are biochemical reactions, not mysterious forces. The implications are staggering. If your brain is a machine, and it is, then who or what is the you that claims to steer it? If your neurons fire based on prior states, on genetics, on environment, on stimuli, where is the freedom in that? If you are predictable, calculable, inevitable, are you still a person? Or just a highly evolved equation wearing skin? This is not philosophy for the sake of torment. It's a question at the very root of identity. You've been told your whole life that you have free will, that you can choose your path, that you are responsible for who you become. But if you peel back the layers, if you trace the chain of causes that led you here, it always leads to something outside your control, your upbringing, your brain chemistry, your culture, your traumas, your DNA. So, when you make a choice, was it ever yours? You might say, but I feel free. I experience choice. Of course you do. So does the puppet, until it sees the strings. Your conscious mind is the last to know. It receives the output of the machine, then narrates it, justifying and explaining with stories. But those stories are post hoc. The brain decides. You rationalize. This realization can break people. It shakes the foundation of morality, of self-worth, of meaning. If no one is truly free, then what is justice? What is punishment? If criminals are just misfiring machines, do they deserve blame? If saints are just lucky in their wiring, do they deserve praise? You start to see how much of society is built on a story that no longer fits. We tell people to be better, to try harder, to choose differently. But what if they can't? What if, at the biochemical level, they are only capable of doing what they do? Suddenly, the world splits open. Responsibility becomes a puzzle. Compassion becomes a necessity. Judgment becomes hollow. But here's the twist. Knowing you're a machine doesn't make the machine stop. It just opens a window to watch it work. And from that window, something strange can happen. Not freedom in the traditional sense, but awareness. Not escape, but observation. You begin to see the loops, the triggers, the scripts. You watch your thoughts rise, your emotions flare, your fears ignite. And sometimes, just sometimes, you hesitate. You pause. You ask, is this me or just momentum? And in that pause, something like freedom begins. Because even if you can't disobey the laws of physics, you can begin to understand them. You can rewrite the code slowly, painfully, deliberately. Not by pure will, but by systems that influence the system. You can shape your environment, rewire your habits, reroute your triggers. Not because you are separate from your brain, but because you are the part of the brain that knows it is watching itself. This is the paradox. You are the machine, but you are also the mechanic. The trap of the clockwork self is real. If you believe you are fully free, you may live in illusion. But if you believe you are completely trapped, you may surrender to helplessness. The truth lies somewhere in between, not in rejecting determinism, but in using it. If you understand your patterns, you can change your inputs. If you study your reactions, you can shift your outcomes, slowly, brutally, imperfectly, but not impossibly. This view does not make life meaningless. In fact, it makes it precious. You are not a blank slate. You are a cascade of causes, a ripple in time, the current shape of countless forces. But within that shape, something extraordinary still stirs. The awareness of the pattern is the beginning of authorship. So no, you may not disobey nature, but you can participate in it. You can step into the loop with eyes open. You can build scaffolding around your tendencies, create systems that support the kind of life you value. You can learn how your gears move, and with enough effort, enough patience, maybe even learn to shift their direction. In the end, the clockwork self is not a prison, it's a mirror. And when you finally look into it without flinching, when you see the wiring, the predictability, the precision, you don't lose your humanity. You discover its source. You are not a ghost in the machine. You are the machine, aware of itself. And in that awareness, a different kind of freedom is born. Not freedom from nature, but freedom within it. The most human freedom there is. The invisible influence. Tide, you believe you're swimming freely, making choices, forging your path, living a life authored by your own will. You feel the currents beneath you, but they seem gentle, manageable. You kick harder, set goals, claim independence. But what if you're not as free as you think? What if, beneath the surface, there are unseen tides pulling you, not by force, but by quiet, invisible influence, toward outcomes you never questioned because they were always expected? Culture, family, fear, they don't shout, they whisper. And over time, you mistake their pull for your own direction. This is the invisible influence tide. It does not come with warning signs or red flags. It moves like gravity, constant, silent, unnoticed until you try to swim against it. It shapes your dreams, your opinions, your relationships. It guides your sense of success and failure, of right and wrong, of what's possible and what's unthinkable. You believe you're choosing, but were the choices ever really yours? It begins before you even know what a choice is. Your family's values wrap around you like water around a fish. They teach you what to fear, what to desire, who to trust, and what to avoid, long before you develop words for those feelings. Maybe you were praised for being quiet, or punished for questioning authority. Maybe love came with strings, and approval meant obedience. These experiences sink deep into your wiring. You begin to anticipate what the people around you want, and then you internalize it. It feels like intuition, but it's not. It's programming. Then comes culture, the larger ocean. Media, school, tradition, religion, social media, all offering images of what a good life looks like, what to wear, who to admire, when to speak, how to be desirable. Culture is not just around you, it's inside you. You consume it and it consumes you. You absorb beliefs without realizing they're beliefs. You follow rules you never agreed to. You think you're choosing what to become, but you're selecting from a menu written by people you've never met, most of whom benefit from you staying predictable. And then there's fear, the oldest tide of all. Fear of rejection, of shame, of being seen as selfish, or difficult, or different. Fear turns influence into obedience. It trains you to calculate every move. Will this upset someone? Will they still love me if I say no? If I change? If I leave? Fear doesn't need to yell. It waits. It speaks in what-ifs, in silence, in tight chests and swallowed truths. Put all this together, and the result is subtle, a life that looks chosen but was actually curated by invisible forces. You go to the school they expected. Take the job that makes sense. Date the person who seems safe. You buy what you're told is cool. You post what will be liked. You keep the peace. And somewhere along the way, your real voice, your unfiltered instinct, your raw desire gets quieter. Until one day you stop and wonder, how did I get here? Whose life is this? This doesn't mean you're a puppet. It means you're human. We all ride the tide. The danger is not in being influenced, but in believing we're immune to it. The moment you assume your choices are pure, untouched, is the moment you become most vulnerable. Because you'll defend those choices with passion, even if they were never truly yours. You'll fight to preserve a path that was laid out for you, not by you. You'll resist change, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the identity that was quietly built for you over years of invisible shaping. This is why change is so hard. Why self-discovery feels like betrayal. To ask, what do I want, can feel like tearing down a house you spent your whole life building, only to find the blueprint was drawn by someone else. But that's also where freedom begins. Not in pretending the tides don't exist, but in learning to see them, to feel when you're being pulled. To ask, is this desire truly mine, or was it placed there? And to sit uncomfortably with the possibility that some of your most deeply held beliefs might not be your own. But awareness is not paralysis. You don't have to cancel everything, burn it all down, vanish into the wilderness. You start with noticing. You observe the tide, feel its pull, and then, maybe for the first time, you choose to swim a little differently. You say no when saying yes would be easier. You speak a truth even if it breaks the pattern. You take a step towards something that feels real, even if no one claps. And yes, it will feel disorienting, like moving without a map, like being out at sea with no current to carry you. But that's where the real journey begins. The ocean is vast, and somewhere beyond the scripted routes, beyond the silent expectations, is a direction that is truly yours. It may not be easy. It may not even be clear, but it will be honest. And that kind of movement, that raw, self-owned momentum, is worth everything. So, the next time you find yourself in motion, ask, who benefits from this path? Who taught me this was the way? What am I afraid would happen if I stopped, turned, or questioned it all? The invisible tide will always be there, but you are not its prisoner. You are not just a swimmer, you are a navigator. And every time you choose to ask the harder questions, every time you turn inward instead of outward for validation, you resist the tide. You become something rare, something true. You become free. The memory rewriter effect. You make decisions every day based on who you think you are, what you've been through, what you've survived. Your past feels like a map, a guide carved by experience, leading you forward. But what if that map is unreliable? What if the past you act on isn't what happened, but what you remember? And what you remember isn't fact, but fiction. This is the memory rewriter effect, the haunting realization that you may be following a myth of yourself, edited, rewritten, and reshaped by your own mind. We like to believe memory is a recording, a mental archive we can revisit at will, but memory is not a tape, it's a story, and stories change. Neuroscience tells us that every time we recall a memory, we don't just replay it, we recreate it. The neural pathways that store your experiences are not solid vaults. They are fluid, flexible, vulnerable to distortion. Each time you remember, you edit. Each time you revisit the past, your emotions in the present leak into the memory. Fear colors it darker. Nostalgia softens it. Regret stretches it, shrinks it, shifts the focus. You think you're accessing the past, but you're really shaping it, again and again. Psychologists call this reconsolidation. When a memory is activated, it becomes unstable, like a saved file that opens for editing. And once it's saved again, it's changed. Perhaps subtly, perhaps completely. So, when you remember the fight, the loss, the success, the turning point, you're not just remembering the facts. You're remembering your feelings about those facts, your beliefs at the time, your need to make sense of the chaos. Slowly, those needs rewrite the narrative. You say, this is who I am because of what I went through. But what if what you went through wasn't exactly how you remember? The most unsettling part? You don't notice the edits, because the rewritten version feels just as real as the original. In fact, it feels more real because it fits your current self-image. The hero, the victim, the survivor, the one who was wronged, the one who overcame, or failed, or never really mattered. These aren't just memories, they're identities, and they shape your decisions, your relationships, your sense of possibility. Studies show just how fragile memory can be. In the 1990s, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that people could be convinced they'd been lost in a mall as a child, a false memory, never actually lived, but believed with vivid emotional certainty. The mind doesn't just store events, it constructs narratives. And those narratives, once internalized, guide your every step. Think about the moment you decided not to trust people, not to try again, not to forgive. What memory did that decision sit on? What version of the past was driving that present choice? And if that version has been rewritten by fear, by bitterness, by years of retelling, then what exactly are you protecting yourself from? This doesn't just affect individuals. Cultures, families, nations, entire communities operate on rewritten memories. History is retold by victors and victims alike, passed down as myth, used to justify present-day actions. The story becomes sacred. Challenge it, and you challenge identity itself. But back in your own mind, the effects can be more subtle and more devastating. You may believe you always fail because your memory exaggerates the moments you did. You may idolize someone who hurt you because your longing has polished their image. You may define yourself by a single mistake because shame has made that memory louder than all the others. The memory rewriter effect doesn't just change what you remember, it changes what you believe is possible. And yet, there is a strange power here. If memory can be rewritten by fear, it can also be rewritten by compassion, by truth, by healing. If your brain rewrites your past every time you remember it, then memory is not just a trap. It's also a door, a chance to see with new eyes, to question the story you've told yourself about who you are, about what happened, about what it means. Therapists use this power. They help clients revisit trauma, not to relive it, but to reframe it, to find meaning where there was once only pain, to insert empathy where there was once only blame, to add context, nuance, even forgiveness. They don't change the facts, but they guide the edits. They help rewrite the myth in a way that liberates rather than confines. Ask yourself, which memories are you living by today? What story do you believe about your past? Who shaped it? Which emotions are distorting it? What would happen if you saw it differently? Not dishonestly, but with deeper honesty. Is your self-image built on clarity or on echoes? We all live with ghosts, memories that whisper who we are and what we deserve. Some lie, some flatter, some wound us quietly every day, but they're not invincible. With awareness, with courage, you can begin to hold them up to the light. You can ask the forbidden question, is this really how it happened? Because once you understand that memory is not a mirror, but a lens, curved, cracked, colored by time, you begin to reclaim your freedom. You don't erase the past, you honor it. But you stop letting the myth control the script of your future. In the end, we are not just shaped by what we remember. We are shaped by how we remember. And that, more than anything else, is where real transformation begins. The boxed infinity paradox. Your mind is infinite. That's what they say. You can dream up entire galaxies, write symphonies that never existed, invent creatures with wings made of smoke or machines that can feel. In daydreams, you defy gravity. In sleep, you time travel. In art, in science, in fiction, you conjure things the world has never seen. And yet, there's a boundary you almost never notice, a quiet edge, invisible but absolute. Because no matter how far your imagination flies, it can never escape the one trap it cannot see. You can't imagine what you've never learned how to imagine. This is the boxed infinity paradox, where creativity feels limitless. But in truth, it stretches only as far as the walls you've forgotten were ever built. You were born into a language, into a culture, into a shape of thinking so familiar, it feels like truth. You were handed metaphors before you had memories. You were told how time moves, what colors mean, what stories are worth telling, what a question should sound like. You were raised inside a box that said, go ahead, imagine anything you want, as long as it fits inside these walls. And you didn't even know they were walls. Even now, with all your intelligence, your art, your rebellion, your ambition, most of what you imagine is still assembled from the same old fragments. The alien worlds you invent still echo Earth's laws. The utopias you envision are shaped by human governments. Your deepest myths, your wildest dreams, they still wear the fingerprints of forgotten teachers, ancient fears, inherited desires. Try this. Imagine a new color. Not a mix of two, not a shimmering variation. Something truly new. Try to picture a shape that isn't just a variation of lines, curves, angles, but an entirely new form. Something your eyes have never seen. Something no geometry can name. Try to conceive of a thought with no words, a structure without cause and effect, a time that doesn't move forward or backward. You can feel the limit immediately, like trying to grab smoke. Your mind stutters. Not because it lacks power, but because it's missing permission. The box isn't cruelty, it's survival. Your ancestors built it to pass knowledge, to create order, to help children understand a vast, chaotic world. But in doing so, they also built blind spots. Generations of thinkers, artists, and scientists pushed those walls outward. They imagined atoms, black holes, digital consciousness, abstract expressionism, alternate realities, but each discovery only expanded the box. It never truly erased it. And the most haunting part, you'll likely never know which ideas you're missing. Not because they're too complex, but because your mind has never even brushed against their edges. There might be ways of feeling, creating, being that are as real as breath, but will never cross your mind. Not once, not in a lifetime, simply because the concept wasn't included in your inheritance. This paradox shows up everywhere. In science, Brilliant minds once swore the sun orbited Earth, because that was the only model they knew how to picture. In language, some cultures have no word for future, and thus, time itself bends differently in their worldview. In emotion, there are feelings other languages name that you don't even realize you're having, because without a word, the mind often skips the experience. You might think, but I'm original, I invent, I rebel, and you do. You bend the rules, you remix the past. But even rebellion has roots. You may reject your parents' beliefs, but you learn the framework from them. You may dream of worlds beyond capitalism, beyond gravity, beyond form, but those dreams are still built from pieces of what came before. The box is clever. It lets you believe it's not there. That's how it stays intact. Does that mean creativity is an illusion? Not at all. It means it's more sacred than you realized. Because every time you stretch beyond what you were given, even an inch, you are moving against the gravitational pull of generations. Every wild idea, every strange new metaphor, every unexplainable emotion that slips into your art is an act of subtle rebellion. You are not breaking the box. You are remembering that it exists. And sometimes, you get lucky. You encounter something so foreign, so unlike anything you know, that it fractures the walls. Just a little. Maybe it's a dream, or a piece of alien music, or a child's question that makes no logical sense but feels deeply right. Maybe it's a psychedelic experience, or a conversation with someone raised in a mind you can't decode. In that moment, the edges of the box shimmer. You see that your infinity is not quite infinite, but it could be. That's the paradox. You are a universe inside a jar. But the jar is transparent, and if you press hard enough, sometimes it cracks. So what do you do with this knowledge? You become humble. You stop assuming that what you see is all there is. You become curious, not just about what others believe, but how they construct belief itself. You seek out alien minds, forgotten languages, impossible philosophies, not to agree, but to stretch. You ask stranger questions. You wonder about what else could exist if only you had the tools to imagine it. And maybe you become patient with yourself and with others. Because now you understand, even when someone seems blind, they might just be boxed. Even when you feel stuck, uninspired, unimaginative, you're not broken. You've just reached the edge of what you've been taught to imagine. And that's not the end of creativity. It's where true creativity begins. The boxed infinity paradox isn't a prison. It's a compass. It points you toward the edge of the known, the unthinkable horizon, where imagination meets its final frontier. Not in what you can invent, but in what you can unlearn. And in that space, where the edge shimmers and your thoughts lose their shape, you may just catch a glimpse of a color that doesn't exist, or a truth without words, or a you beyond all programming. And that, perhaps, is the first real act of imagination. The frozen moment trap. You stand in a moment, frozen. One of those tiny crossroads that feel infinite. A text you could send or delete, a word you could speak or swallow, a road you could take or avoid for the rest of your life. It feels like everything is open now, like you are holding time itself in your hand. But what if that feeling is just an illusion? What if this moment, which looks like a decision, is already the end of a long chain you never saw begin? This is the frozen moment trap, the belief that right now is where it all starts, when in truth, this second was sculpted long before it reached you. The choice you think you're making freely is just the crest of a wave born from 1,000 others. Moments, memories, moods, instincts, pressures, fears, rippling toward you long before you were aware there was even water. You feel yourself hesitate in front of a door, wondering whether to knock. But the shape of that hesitation, how long you pause, what your hand does, whether you move forward or walk away, is not born here in the silence. It comes from deeper places, the rejection you haven't forgotten, the praise you still chase, the social scripts etched into your childhood. Your muscles remember what your mind can't name. You feel free. But the choice is heavy with history. Neuroscience confirms what intuition sometimes denies. The brain begins to prepare for action before the conscious mind becomes aware of it. That moment when you feel like you're deciding, it's already in motion. Like watching a lightning strike and thinking you caused the thunder. You are not the origin. You are the echo. Psychologists call it post-dictive construction. Your mind builds the sense of agency after the fact. The feeling of, I chose this, is stitched into memory after the choice is already in motion. And so, every frozen moment, every breathless pause, becomes a movie frame dressed in false freedom. We believe we are standing at the fork in the road, unaware that the road has been bending for miles behind us. Think of the last time you snapped at someone, or walked away, or fell in love, or said nothing when you should have screamed. That moment, so sharp, so personal, was shaped by forces layered deep beneath it. The rhythm of your upbringing, the tone of a stranger's voice, the glance you interpreted through years of past glances, what you saw, what you heard, what you feared. It all folded into that second. You didn't choose in a vacuum. You were carried. And still the moment feels real. You tell yourself, that was my decision. And in a way, it was. But the self who made it, the architecture of desire, of expectation, of memory, that self was already built before you noticed the moment even existed. This is not a message of despair. It's a message of awakening. Because once you see the frozen moment trap, you begin to see the river beneath the ice. You begin to trace the currents, the ripples, the old echoes still alive in your body. You begin to realize that your freedom doesn't live in isolated choices, but in how aware you are of the water that carries you. The world is full of frozen moments, decisions that seem final, permanent, clean. But nothing is untouched. Your now is a ghost of 1,000 whispers, the scent of a parent's cologne, the absence of someone who should have stayed, the rhythm of a city you've never escaped. Each I will is already tangled with I was. And yet, there is power here, not in pretending you are untouched, but in learning to see the touch, in mapping the hidden architecture beneath your decisions, in asking, what am I standing on? Who shaped this hesitation? What storm pushed me to this calm? The moment is not yours alone, but you can meet it fully if you dare. You are not the writer of every moment, but you can become the reader who begins to understand the script. You can trace the ink back to the trembling hand that first wrote your fear, your hope, your silence. You can learn when to pause the story, not to freeze it, but to feel it more honestly. Because the frozen moment trap isn't just about control, it's about illusion. The illusion that we are only now, only this breath, only this turning. But you are so much more. You are the weight of 1,000,000 choices made before you. You are the continuation of stories too vast to hold in your palm. And in that realization, not in the illusion of a perfect choice, but in the truth of your layered self, there is something strangely liberating. You may never catch the exact moment the choice is born, but you can shape the ground it grows from. You can step back, slow down, learn your rhythms, feel your own gravity. And maybe, just maybe, when the next frozen moment arrives, you'll breathe a little deeper, listen a little longer, and choose, not in ignorance of the ripples, but in awareness of the tide, because the moment is not yours to own, but it is yours to meet, and that meeting, vulnerable, imperfect, awake, might be the only freedom we ever really have. The commanded desire. Paradox, you say you want something, a career, a person, a status symbol, a lifestyle, and you feel that want in your bones. You chase it, crave it, sometimes even reshape your life for it. And when someone questions it, you defend it fiercely. Because I want it, because it matters to me. But stop for a moment. Ask yourself the question that rarely gets asked. Who told you to want this? This is the commanded desire paradox. The uncomfortable truth that what you want is not entirely yours. Desires feel spontaneous, personal, authentic. But under the surface, they are embedded, updated, and triggered by forces you rarely see. Every want you chase has a story, often not written by you. From the moment you're born, you're surrounded by messages about what is valuable, attractive, powerful, worthy. You don't just see these messages, you absorb them. They're in the lullabies sung to you, the shows you watch, the toys you're handed. As a child, you mimic the world around you to survive. You want what others cheer for. You desire what earns you love. It feels natural, but it's training. Desire begins as a social reflex. The child who is praised for being obedient learns to want approval. The one who is ignored unless they achieve learns to want achievement. Over time, this shapes the emotional structure of the self. You don't just act for rewards, you begin to crave them. Your inner compass twists to point toward external validation. Culture refines this process. It feeds you images, ideals, icons. You're told what success looks like, what beauty is, What kind of life is worth envy? You are handed a script for desire and told, be yourself. But the self they ask you to be has already been quietly scripted in the background. You see it in advertising, designed to hijack your dopamine system and turn wants into needs. You see it in social media, where curated lives serve as mirrors for your own emptiness. You scroll, compare, scroll again, and somewhere in the middle of it, you begin to want things you never thought about before. The perfect body, the exotic trip, the viral fame, the validation of strangers. You begin to measure your worth by how closely your desires match the dominant narrative. If you want what others want, you feel safe, aligned, successful. If you want something different, something strange, impractical, or hard to explain, you hesitate. You wonder what's wrong with you. Your desires, even the ones that feel most private, are shaped by a system designed to tell you who you are. Psychologists know this. The theory of mimetic desire, pioneered by René Girard, suggests that you don't want things independently. You want them because someone else wants them. Desire is contagious. You model your longings on those around you, often unconsciously. The more others seem to chase something, the more valuable it becomes to you, not because it fulfills you, but because it signals worth. This means your most burning passions, your most intense cravings may be echoes. Echoes of a teacher you admired, a parent you feared, a celebrity you followed, a stranger you envied. You chase careers that make no one happy. You date people you don't truly connect with. You buy things to impress people who aren't even looking. And all the while you tell yourself, I chose this. But can a choice be free if the desire behind it wasn't? Even rebellion often follows a script. You reject what others want, but only to prove your independence. And so, you adopt the counterculture, the alternative, the opposite. Still, your desire is reactive. Still, it's been commanded just from a different direction. This isn't hopeless. It's liberating. When you see desire for what it is, a system of triggers, patterns, feedback loops, you can begin to examine it. Not to eliminate it. Desire is part of being alive. But to ask deeper questions, why do I want this? Who benefits from me wanting it? What deeper need is this desire masking? You may find that many of your wants are armor. You want money because it promises safety. You want beauty because it promises love. You want success because it silences the voice that says you're not enough. The true need beneath the desire is often simple: to be safe, to be seen, to be loved. But the paths sold to you are complex, exhausting, endless. And once you see this, you begin to soften. You begin to listen, not to the advertisements or the influencers or the crowd, but to the quieter voice beneath all that noise. The voice that says, I'm tired of running toward things that don't feed me. The voice that wonders what it would be like to want nothing for a moment, to just be. True autonomy isn't choosing your desires, it's examining them. It's sitting with a want long enough to ask, is this mine? Or did I inherit it, absorb it, borrow it? You may still choose to pursue it, but now you are choosing with awareness, and that awareness is the beginning of freedom. The commanded desire paradox will never fully disappear. You are a social creature. You will always be shaped by the world around you. But you can move through that world with your eyes open. You can hold your desires in your hand and turn them over like stones, asking where they came from, what they cost, and whether they still deserve your energy. You don't have to erase desire, but you don't have to worship it either. You can sit with it, question it, and slowly reclaim it. Not every want is true. Not every craving is sacred. And sometimes the most powerful act is to pause in the pursuit and ask, who whispered this into my heart? Because when you stop chasing what was never yours to begin with, you finally make space for the desires that were waiting all along. Quiet, strange, beautiful. The ones that don't make sense. The ones no one taught you to want. The ones that feel like coming home. The emotional override effect. You think you make decisions with logic. That reason guides your actions. That when you choose what to say, where to go, who to trust, it's because you've weighed the facts, thought it through, and come to a clear conclusion. But what if that's an illusion? What if the real decision was made before you even noticed the question? What if emotion, not logic, is the first responder, the silent commander, the hidden author of most of your choices? This is the emotional override effect, the phenomenon where your brain reacts emotionally first. and only later lets your conscious mind catch up. By the time you're explaining your decision, it's already done. Your story, your reasoning, your justification. It's a postscript, a tidy narrative wrapped around something that happened in a blink, in a gut, in a heartbeat. You don't think your way into feeling, you feel your way into thinking. Neuroscience proves this. Your amygdala, your brain's fear and threat detection system, fires milliseconds before your prefrontal cortex, where logic and planning live. The limbic system moves fast, ancient, primal. It doesn't ask. It doesn't calculate. It reacts. Your heart races, your hands tense, your stomach turns, and only afterward do you begin to explain it to yourself. I just had a bad feeling. Something seemed off. I knew I shouldn't have gone. Even choices that feel rational are often shaped by emotion. You buy the car because it feels powerful. You choose the partner because they feel safe. You take the job because it feels like success. Then, your brain scrambles to make the logic fit. It's efficient, practical, defensible. But beneath the bullet points, emotion had already pulled the lever. This override effect isn't just about fear. It's also about love, shame, pride, envy, guilt. You walk into a room and instantly like someone. You don't know why. Later, you'll say it was their values, their energy, their intelligence. But the truth is, your brain picked up on micro-expressions, posture, tone, signals that whispered, safe, or interesting, or like me. You felt it first. You decided before you knew you had decided. Even your morality, the things you swear are based on principles, can be overridden. Studies show that when people are confronted with emotionally charged scenarios, their judgments shift dramatically, even if the logic is the same. The trolley problem, the thought experiment with impossible choices. Your brain doesn't stick to the script. It follows the emotional current. You empathize, you recoil, you decide. This doesn't mean you're irrational. It means you're human. Emotion evolved to protect you, to make decisions faster than thought could keep up. In the wild, hesitation could mean death. Your brain had to move now, think later. And even today in meetings, relationships, negotiations, that instinct still lives on. You feel threatened, and your voice sharpens before you know you're angry. You feel insulted, and your body turns cold before you know you're hurt. You're already acting. Your logic is scrambling to catch the train, and the override isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, slow, a smile you can't forget, a comment that stings for days, a memory that rises out of nowhere and reshapes how you feel about someone. You tell yourself you're being thoughtful, but in truth, your emotional center is driving, and your rational brain is just the passenger writing the travelogue. Marketers know this. Politicians know this. Cult leaders, charismatic bosses, influencers, they all play the emotional strings first. They sell feeling, not logic. They trigger fear, desire, nostalgia, hope. And once your emotion is engaged, they slide in the message. The facts feel true because the feelings came first. That's why misinformation spreads faster when it's frightening. That's why people cling to beliefs long after they've been disproven, because the belief is anchored not in fact, but in emotional identity. But here's the deeper risk. When emotion overrides thought too often, you begin to lose your grip on self-awareness. You think you're in control, but you're justifying impulses. You think you're choosing freely, but you're following emotional scripts written long ago, by childhood, by trauma, by culture. You don't know why certain people scare you, why some opportunities feel wrong even when they're right. You only know what your emotion tells you, and you trust it, even when it's lying. That's why reflection matters, not to erase emotion, but to examine it, to sit with the reaction and ask, what's really driving this? Am I afraid or just uncomfortable? Am I drawn to this because it's right or because it's familiar? Am I rejecting this because it's dangerous or just because it threatens my ego? These are not easy questions, but they are the only way to slow the override, to bring the conscious mind back into the room. The emotional override effect is not a flaw, it's a force. But, like all forces, it needs awareness. You won't stop emotion from rising, from steering, from whispering its first impressions, but you can learn to pause before acting. You can learn to listen to the feeling without obeying it blindly. You can learn to ask, is this truth or just reaction? Because the more you learn to notice the override, the more power you reclaim. You stop being a passenger in your own mind. You stop justifying what you didn't really choose. And you start moving. Not by instinct alone, not by fear or approval, but by intention. So, the next time a decision rushes through you, wait just a second longer. Trace the feeling to its source. Is it fear? Is it pride? Is it love? The choice may still be the same, but this time, you'll know who really made it. And in that knowing, you begin to step out of the automatic and into the fully human. The genetic puppet dilemma. You like to think you're in control, that your choices reflect your values, that your personality is a product of experience, reflection, growth. But what if the most defining parts of you, the way you react to fear, the sound of your laugh, the things that keep you awake at night, were decided long before you had a name? What if your temperament, your instincts, your emotional thresholds, your talents and triggers were not earned or chosen, but programmed into your flesh by forces you never met? This is the genetic puppet dilemma, the haunting question of how much of you is really you when the script was already inside your cells. It begins before you ever make a decision. Before your first breath, your DNA was already working, building your brain, calibrating your neurotransmitters, setting baselines for fear, aggression, empathy, joy. You didn't choose your emotional sensitivity. You didn't select your dopamine receptors or the shape of your prefrontal cortex or how tightly your amygdala grips when it senses danger. These were written in code: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, strung together in a language older than consciousness. We've known for decades that genes influence physical traits: eye color, height, metabolism. But recent science has gone further. Genes don't just shape the body, they script the mind. Twin studies have shown that even when raised apart, identical twins often share eerily similar habits, phobias, life outcomes, political leanings, career preferences, even the age they lose their virginity. It's not absolute, but it's undeniable. And yet, we are told to take credit for our personality, to stand tall in our strengths, to work on our weaknesses, to believe in our power to choose. But what if the playing field was never level? What if the resilient child, the confident speaker, the calm under pressure, was built that way, not forged? And what if your anxiety, your impulsiveness, your rage, or your sadness was not a moral failing or psychological flaw, but an inherited algorithm running quietly beneath the surface? Think about how much of your daily life is shaped by temperament. Some people wake up optimistic. Some default to dread. Some feel deeply and often. Others ride a flat line of emotional quiet. These aren't just attitudes, they are predispositions, etched into biology. You may be praised for being calm, productive, disciplined. But what if that was always your setting? And what if someone else's chaos, messiness, or despair was just as automatic, only theirs was punished? The dilemma deepens when you add instinct, your fight or flight response, your sexual orientation, your need for control or chaos. These often emerge before conscious thought. You might feel drawn to danger or allergic to risk. You might crave validation or detest attention. You think these are choices, but sometimes they're patterns passed down through blood. A great-grandparent's trauma echoing in your startle reflex, a hunter's vigilance in your scan of the room. Even your beliefs, your openness to new ideas, your willingness to trust have heritable components. Some brains are wired to seek novelty, others to preserve stability. The revolutionary and the conservative, the dreamer and the skeptic, are not just products of upbringing. They are expressions of molecular inheritance. So, where then is free will? If so much of what you feel and do was laid down before you could speak, are you a puppet of your genome? Are you just a walking script, animated by chance mutations and ancestral leftovers? Not quite, but not as free as you were told. The truth is more uncomfortable and more beautiful. You are a collaboration between nature and nurture, between code and consciousness, between what was given and what you build with it. Your genes may set the stage, but they don't dictate the entire performance. They give you a starting point, a toolkit, a rhythm, but how you respond, what you notice, how you shape your story, that part remains unwritten. Modern neuroscience speaks of epigenetics, the way experience can turn genes on or off. Trauma, love, stress, meditation, even diet can influence how your genetic code is expressed. In other words, your choices matter. Not because they erase your DNA, but because they shape how it shows up. The genetic puppet dilemma is not a verdict, it's a mirror. It asks you to look closely at what you take credit for, what you judge in others, and what you truly control. It asks you to meet yourself with more curiosity, and maybe more compassion, because what you thought was weakness may be wiring. What you hated in yourself might be inherited pain, and what you admire may be as much luck as effort. This understanding doesn't strip away agency. It adds depth to it. It allows you to stop pretending that everyone starts in the same place. It lets you meet difference with grace, meet yourself with nuance. It lets you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this wiring trying to protect me from? How can I work with it, not against it?" So next time you're caught in a behavior you don't understand, a pattern you can't break, a part of yourself that feels alien, pause. Ask, is this me, or is this programming? And if it's programming, can I write a new line of code, not by force, but by awareness? Because maybe you were born with a script, but maybe, just maybe, you're the one learning how to read it, revise it, and turn it into something human, honest, and entirely your own. The role assignment. Paradox. You wake up each morning thinking you're living your life. You make choices, speak your truth, follow your instincts. But what if the script was already written? What if the role you're playing, who you are, what you're allowed to feel, how the world sees you, was cast before you ever had a name? Long before your first word, your first breath, even your first thought, you were handed a costume and told, "This is you," and you obeyed. Not because you were weak, but because no one told you it was an act. This is the role assignment paradox, the illusion that we're authors of our lives, when, in truth, most of us are following roles that were silently assigned the moment we entered the stage. Think about it. You didn't choose your name, your language, your gender, your race, your religion, your family's country, or customs. You inherited them. They wrapped around you before you knew what I even meant. And each of those inherited traits came with instructions. Some loud, some quiet. Boys don't cry. Girls should be polite. We don't talk about that here. You're the responsible one. You're the wild one. You're lucky to even be here. You didn't ask for the part, but you learned to play it anyway. Because that's what survival looks like in a world that judges before it listens. You adapt. You perform. You become the version of yourself that keeps you safe, loved, accepted. And after a while, you forget there was ever a version outside the role. Some roles are obvious, printed on birth certificates and ID cards. Others are more subtle, stitched into how you were treated in classrooms, on sidewalks, in mirrors. Maybe you were cast as the caregiver, the rebel, the golden child, the overlooked one. Maybe you didn't even notice because the world kept applauding your performance, rewarding you for staying in character. And when you tried to step out of it, even just a little, you felt it. The resistance, the cold silence, the laughter, the punishment. You were told, in 100 invisible ways, that's not who you are, stay in your role. So you stepped back, you smiled, you obeyed. Psychologists call this role internalization. Over time, the act becomes identity. You start to believe the lines were yours all along. The girl who was always told she's delicate begins to doubt her strength. The boy who was always praised for logic forgets how to cry. The child who was labeled trouble starts living up to the name. And soon, the person inside the costume disappears behind the performance. But here's the paradox. Even when the roles hurt us, we cling to them. Because they give us structure. Because stepping out means facing the unknown. Because breaking character risks rejection, exile, invisibility. Sometimes it's easier to play the part you hate than to face a world that has no script for who you really are. Look around. How many people are still stuck in roles they didn't choose? A woman working twice as hard to be heard. A man who can't grieve because he was told strength means silence. A child expected to heal the family's trauma. An immigrant playing the role of model citizen to stay safe. A queer person trying to shrink themselves into a role that never fit. Everyone pretending, hoping the mask will eventually feel like skin. And what about you? Whose lines are you still reciting? Whose expectations are you still trying to fulfill? When was the last time you asked, did I choose this, or was I assigned it? The tragedy is not just that roles confine us, it's that we become loyal to them. We police ourselves. We criticize others who step out. We say things like, "That's not like you," or "You've changed," as if transformation were a betrayal instead of a birthright. But it's not your fault. The role assignment paradox is ancient. Societies are built on predictable characters. Control thrives when people stay in line. If everyone starts rewriting their roles, the story changes, and those in power lose the plot. But still, you have a choice. Not always a loud, dramatic exit, but quiet, deliberate edits. You can question a line before you speak it. You can say no to the scene that doesn't serve you. You can grieve the parts of yourself you abandoned to fit the costume, and you can begin, slowly, to write new pages, ones that make room for your real voice. This isn't easy. Roles offer comfort. They give you something to point to when life feels uncertain. But they also limit you. They shrink your world. And you were not born to be a cardboard cutout in someone else's story. You were born to evolve, to surprise even yourself, to outgrow the frame. So, what now? Start small. Notice the moments when your reaction feels scripted. Notice the words that taste like someone else's mouth. Notice the thoughts that sound like echoes instead of truths, and ask, who benefits from me staying in this role? What would happen if I stepped out, even just for a moment? You may lose applause, you may lose approval, but you will gain something far more dangerous, far more sacred. You will begin to remember who you were before the costume, before the stage, before the script. And maybe, just maybe, that version of you, the one no one wrote lines for, the one with no assigned title or task, has a story worth telling, even if the world hasn't heard it before. Especially because the world hasn't heard it before. The rebellion loop trap. You feel the fire first. A tightening in your chest, a refusal. A moment when something inside you snaps and says, no more. You see the cracks in the rules, the lies in the rituals, the weight of expectations you never agreed to. And so, you rebel. You raise your voice, change your look, reject the beliefs handed to you. It feels electric, like breaking free, like becoming real. But slowly you begin to notice something strange. The rebellion feels familiar, predictable, even marketable. You look around and realize others are rebelling in the exact same way. The clothes you wear to stand out are already sold in every store. The slogans you shout are printed on t-shirts. The system you thought you were fighting, it's not crumbling, it's smiling. This is the rebellion loop trap. When your protest is not a rupture, but a rerun. When your defiance was anticipated, packaged, and folded neatly into the machine. You feel like you're escaping, but you're still playing the part written for you. Because even rebellion, if you're not careful, becomes a script. Every generation has its symbols of rebellion. Its music, its language, its fashion, its enemies. But look closer, and you'll see how quickly these become brands. How easily your anger is mined for content. How protest morphs into identity, and identity morphs into lifestyle. You are offered the illusion of resistance, while your energy is harvested for profit. The system doesn't always crush rebellion. Often, it absorbs it. It offers pre-approved ways to dissent, choices that feel like freedom, but are just new costumes in the same play. You dye your hair, change your flag, switch your screen name, but the algorithms already predicted the shift. Your revolution is optimized for engagement. Your outburst increases traffic. Your fury is monetized. Even worse, your rebellion may reinforce the very thing you think you're fighting. If you're taught to hate conformity, the system sells you rebellion. If you're taught to distrust authority, it gives you influencers instead. If you're trained to reject the old, you're handed the new, but only what's safe, what's approved, what's profitable. You think you're refusing the script, but you've just flipped the page to the next act. Think of the protest movements that were watered down into aesthetics, the corporate campaigns that borrow language from revolutions while selling you soda or sneakers, the rebellion that becomes a fashion trend, a playlist, a hashtag, something you perform until the next wave hits. You are told that change is happening, that your outrage matters, that your dissent is sacred. But beneath the surface, the same structures remain intact. The gears turn, the profits rise, and your rebellion becomes part of the machinery. Even your anger is mapped. Even your radicalism is forecasted. Surveillance systems track your keywords, your friends, your favorite subcultures. Data flows into charts and heat maps. Somewhere, your protest was expected, even needed, because rebellion too is energy, and energy can be redirected. And this goes deeper than brands and algorithms. It reaches into psychology, because often the way you rebel is not just shaped by culture, but by the very authority you're trying to escape. The parent you defy by becoming exactly the opposite of them. The religion you reject by clinging to its mirror image. The school you hate by staying trapped in the language of its failures. You break the rule, but you're still inside the frame. You react instead of create. You rebel in a way they trained you to. That's the trap. You think you've burned down the house, but you're still walking its blueprint. Your rebellion is loud, but not free, because it's still a response, still a reaction, still defined by the thing you claim to hate. You haven't escaped the system. You've become its shadow, and the loop continues. Every rebellion becomes the new normal. Every outsider gets welcomed into the spotlight. The underground goes mainstream. The punk becomes a product. The revolution becomes a brand. And you, the rebel, wake up one day wondering why it still feels like you're playing a part someone else wrote for you. So, how do you escape? Not by screaming louder. Not by finding the next trend to oppose. But by asking quieter, deeper questions. What part of this rebellion is truly mine? What part of my identity is just a reaction? Am I creating something new or just opposing something old? True rebellion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet act of building something that doesn't fit inside their story. It's stepping off the stage entirely, not to destroy the play, but to write one that was never meant to exist. It's not about breaking rules. They expect that. It's about refusing the game altogether. The rebellion loop trap is seductive. It gives you the thrill of revolution while keeping you in your seat. But if you can see it, if you can step back and question the source of your fire, you can begin to choose your rebellion instead of inheriting it, because real freedom isn't in the fight. It's in the awareness behind the fight. It's in the creation that doesn't wait for permission. And it starts when you realize that the most radical act may not be to resist what they gave you, but to become something they never saw coming. The open cage illusion. They tell you the door is open, that you're free to leave whenever you want, that no one's keeping you here. Stay or go, it's up to you. And technically they're right. No chains, no guards, no locked gates. Just a door, slightly ajar, waiting. You're not a prisoner, they say. You're here because you choose to be. But what they never say out loud, what you only start to feel in the deepest part of you, is what leaving will cost. Not in violence, but in silence. Not in bars, but in abandonment. Not in blood, but in the slow bleed of your identity unraveling. The cage isn't locked because it doesn't need to be. You'll stay, freely, because stepping out would mean stepping into a world that no longer wants you. This is the open cage illusion. A life where the trap isn't physical, but psychological. Where freedom exists on paper, but the price of exercising it is too high. So you sit there, day after day, within invisible walls, telling yourself you're not trapped. Just loyal, just committed, just realistic. You don't see the bars, so you start to believe there are none. It begins with belonging. The group, the family, the belief system. They give you something sacred, a sense of home. You're seen, accepted, needed. There are shared stories, inside jokes, rituals, and rhythms that feel like music only you and they can hear. You learn the rules not through punishment, but through warmth. Conformity becomes comfort. Agreement feels like love. And then, without noticing it, you begin to fuse who you are with where you are. But the moment comes, always when a question forms, a doubt, a divergence, something small, a comment that doesn't sit right, a rule that seems unjust, a contradiction no one wants to explain. You ask gently, carefully. The room grows quiet, eyes narrow, smiles falter. The warmth becomes colder, not violently, just enough to teach you the lesson. Curiosity costs connection. So you stop asking. Eventually the doubt returns, stronger. Now it's not a question, it's a pull, a sense that your values are drifting, that the person you're becoming inside this place is not the one you were meant to be. The door is right there, open. You could walk through. But then what? Out there is exile. Leaving means more than walking away. It means walking alone. It means losing relationships you've nurtured for years. It means being labeled disloyal, unstable, dangerous, broken. It means starting over without the history, the context, the shorthand that once made life feel rich. You'll be free, but untethered. Free, but erased. And the most brutal part? No one will stop you. In fact, they'll smile and say, "Go ahead, it's your life." But behind that smile is a warning. Leave, and you leave us. Not just physically, but emotionally, permanently. You will become one of them. And the people you love will look at you like a stranger. Or worse, a traitor. So you stay. You smile. You nod. You play the role. And over time, you convince yourself it's not a role. That this is who you really are. That your doubts were just weakness. That your desire to leave was a phase. You adjust your beliefs, your language, even your memories to match the cage. You choose to stay. But the choice was never truly free. It was shaped by fear, by love, by loneliness, by loss. And the world applauds your loyalty. This illusion is everywhere, in families that only love you if you stay silent, in jobs that preach empowerment while punishing independence, in belief systems that promise heaven but exile heretics, in relationships where love is used as currency, given when you obey, withheld when you deviate. The door is always open. That's what makes the illusion so powerful. No one has to force you to stay. You'll do it yourself. You'll chain yourself to belonging. You'll bury your questions. You'll decorate the cage, call it purpose, call it love, call it home. But deep down, something in you remembers. Remembers the early self, the curious one, the wild one, the one who asked without shame, the one who dreamed of something beyond the walls. That self is still there, watching, waiting, whispering. Sometimes the whisper gets louder. You begin to wonder what would happen if you left, who you might become, what truths you could finally speak, what silence you could break, what life could look like if it was truly your own. You imagine the pain, the rupture, the loneliness, but also the relief, the breath, the clarity, the sky without a ceiling. And you start to realize peace at the cost of self is not peace. Love that demands obedience is not love. A life lived only to please others is not a life. It's a performance. So maybe one day you walk to the edge, hand on the open door, and this time you don't ask for permission. You don't wait for approval. You just step through. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. And as the walls fall behind you, you may find that freedom hurts, but at least it's yours. At least it's honest. And in that pain is the possibility of becoming, not who they needed you to be, but who you truly are. Not safely caged, but finally, fully alive. The observer dilemma. You want to understand yourself. You want to grow, to heal, to evolve. And to do that, you're told you must observe your thoughts, your habits, your reactions. Stand back and watch your own mind at work. But the moment you try to do that, something strange happens. The observer, the you who is watching, turns out to be made of the same thoughts you're trying to watch. The watcher is not separate. It is also the watched. And suddenly, you're caught in a loop. To change your mind, you must observe it. But if the observer is also the mind, then who is watching whom? This is the observer dilemma, the paradox at the center of self-awareness. The idea that your mind must split itself in two, one part to act, the other to reflect, one part to speak, the other to listen. You do this all the time. You replay conversations in your head. You notice yourself reacting too strongly or too quickly. You hear your own thoughts and think, why did I think that? But every time you step back to observe, you're still using the same system, the same neurons, memories, biases, and fears. The mirror trying to see itself. It feels like you are two selves. The reactive self that snaps, speaks, flinches, desires, and the reflective self that watches, judges, plans, regrets. But look closer, and the separation begins to blur. The reflective self isn't objective. It's soaked in beliefs, emotion, culture, memory. It's not some elevated soul above the storm. It's just another wave in the ocean of your mind, claiming to be the sky. Neuroscience backs this up. The part of your brain that tracks your own thoughts, your self-monitoring system, is deeply entangled with the parts that generate those thoughts in the first place. You can watch yourself, But the watcher is biased. It's wired by experience, conditioned by childhood, shaped by language and trauma. So, what feels like self-awareness may actually be a deeper layer of self-storytelling, a more sophisticated illusion. And yet, it works. At least sometimes. You catch yourself about to say something cruel, and you stop. You notice a fear rising and choose not to obey it. You feel shame, and instead of collapsing, you observe it. Disidentify with it. Let it pass. This act of inner distance, of becoming the observer, is what allows you to change, to grow. But the question lingers. Who, exactly, is doing the changing? Spiritual traditions have wrestled with this dilemma for centuries. In mindfulness and meditation, you're taught to become the observer, to watch thoughts pass by like clouds, without judgment, to find the silent witness behind the noise. But the deeper you go, the more mysterious the observer becomes. Is it consciousness itself? Is it a soul? Is it just the illusion of unity created by a chaotic neural symphony? Philosophy has a name for this too. The infinite regress of self-reference. If you watch your thoughts, and then you watch the part of you that is watching your thoughts, how far back does it go? Is there a final you hiding behind all the masks? Or is you just the act of watching itself? An echo looking for a voice. The observer dilemma reveals something unsettling. Your sense of self is recursive. It loops. It folds in on itself like a mirror facing a mirror, an endless hallway of reflections. And yet, from within this loop, you live, you make choices. You change. Somehow awareness emerges from the loop. Not pure, not free, but real enough to pause, to redirect, to interrupt the pattern. And maybe that's all you need. Not perfect clarity, not a God's eye view of your psyche, but the brief moment of distance, the breath between impulse and action. That's where freedom lives. In that pause, you're not just reacting. You're witnessing. You're stepping into a role that isn't fully you, but also isn't not you. The observer and the observed blur, and something new is born, a choice. It's humbling, because it means you'll never see yourself fully. You'll never be outside yourself looking in. You are both the storm and the lighthouse. You are the thought and the thinker, the story and the narrator. And yet, from this impossibility, something beautiful arises: compassion, forgiveness. Because if the mind is watching itself through layers of memory and distortion, then of course you struggle. Of course you repeat mistakes. Of course you misunderstand yourself. But also, of course you can change. The observer dilemma isn't a trap. It's a threshold. A moment when you realize that self-awareness is not about escaping the mind, but about making peace with its strange structure. The goal is not to find a perfect observer, but to learn to observe gently, to catch yourself, not to condemn, but to understand. To see that you are a process, not a product, a river that watches itself flowing. So, the next time a thought rises and you notice it, ask yourself, who is doing the noticing? And then, let the question echo without needing an answer. The point is not to solve the loop, but to live within it, with clarity, with humility, with presence. The observer is the mind is the observer, and between them, somehow you are here, watching, choosing, becoming. The feedback loop self. You wake up, speak, move, react. You make choices. You shape the world around you by what you say, what you fear, what you expect. But then the world responds, subtly at first. A glance, a comment, an outcome. That response shapes your mood, your next thought, your next move. You adjust. The world adjusts back. And slowly, without realizing, you're dancing with something invisible, a feedback loop. One that mirrors you, reinforces you, trains you, into you. This is the paradox of the feedback loop self. You shape the world, but the world shapes you. And somewhere in the spiral, the line between cause and effect disappears. It begins with something as small as a tone of voice. You speak nervously and people treat you gently. You speak with authority, and people follow your lead. Their response teaches you who you are, or at least who the world thinks you are. You adapt, refine, repeat, and every repetition strengthens the loop. Soon, you're no longer choosing a behavior. You're enacting a role that the world helped write. Psychologists call this reciprocal determinism, the idea that personal behavior, the environment, and internal thought all influence each other in a continuous loop. It's not just that you respond to your surroundings, it's that your responses change those surroundings, which in turn shift how you respond. Identity is not a solo project. It is a collaborative, recursive system. Think of the shy child who avoids eye contact. Teachers notice, peers treat them as fragile. The child, sensing this, withdraws further. The world confirms their identity as shy, not because it was written in stone, but because every reaction fed the next. The loop tightens. The identity solidifies, not as truth, but as pattern. Or the confident student, praised for speaking up, rewarded with attention and leadership roles. The world reflects strength. That reflection becomes a mirror. The mirror becomes a script. Soon, confidence isn't just a trait. It's a role reinforced daily by feedback. But what if the same child had been ignored, mocked, or silenced? The loop might have spun in the other direction entirely. In adult life, the loops grow more complex. You fear abandonment, so you keep your distance. That distance makes others feel unwanted. They pull away, you say, "I knew it. I can't trust anyone." The loop is complete. You project your fear, the world returns it, and the cycle feeds itself. You believe you're unworthy of love, so you apologize constantly, downplay your strengths, choose people who confirm your low self-worth. When they mistreat you, you tell yourself it proves what you already knew. You're not reacting to reality, you're co-creating it, locked in a loop where the self you believe in calls itself into being. Social media magnifies this dynamic. You post a thought, an image, a version of yourself. The world reacts, likes, comments, silence. You adapt. You post again. You begin to optimize your personality for engagement. Slowly, subtly, you become the self that performs best. The algorithm doesn't just respond to you, it trains you. You react to feedback loops that react to you. And the terrifying part? It feels like you. It feels authentic. Because each loop, no matter how it began, becomes self-reinforcing. The line between cause and identity blurs. You ask, did I create this version of me, or did the world sculpt me through its responses? Where is the origin? Neuroscience offers clues. The brain is plastic, constantly rewiring based on repetition and environment. Every time you behave a certain way, those neural pathways grow stronger. But those behaviors are shaped by reinforcement, by reward and rejection, by how others respond. Identity is not fixed. It's a network of patterns, sculpted moment by moment through interaction. This creates a paradox. You are not a static being reacting to the world. You are not a master controller dictating your destiny. You are a node in a recursive system, shaping and shaped, writing and being written, reacting to echoes of your own reactions. So, how do you escape the loop? First, you become aware of it. Most of us live inside loops we've never noticed. The way you always laugh when you're nervous, the way you downplay compliments, the way you escalate arguments without meaning to. These are feedback rituals, habits that summon the very world that sustains them. Next, you pause the pattern. Interrupt the spiral. If you fear rejection, lean in instead of pulling away. If you expect failure, act as if success is possible, even if your body screams otherwise. Disrupting the loop, even once, weakens it. Not because you've solved it, but because you've stopped feeding it. A loop unfed begins to unravel. Therapists call this pattern interruption. Spiritual teachers call it awakening. In both cases, it is the art of stepping outside the reflex and seeing the system that creates the self. Not to destroy it, but to choose within it. Because the self is not a lie, it's a dance. But you can change the rhythm. Ask yourself, what version of me do I keep inviting? What expectations do I plan in others that they reflect back? Who would I be if I stopped responding in the same way? What if I chose silence where I usually explain? Stillness where I panic? Vulnerability where I deflect? The feedback loop self is not a trap, it's a mirror house. Every angle reveals a version of you, some distorted, some beautiful, some painful. But once you know you're inside it, you can stop searching for the origin and start becoming the author. In the end, identity is not found in a single moment or decision or truth. It is sculpted through recursion. You shape the world shapes you. The feedback never ends. But with awareness, you can begin to shape the loop. instead of just living inside it. The Enlightenment obedience trap. You seek awakening, freedom, truth. You read the books, sit in silence, follow the breath. You chant the mantras, study the wisdom, surrender the ego, and then something shifts, a lightness, a moment of stillness so complete it feels eternal. You taste it, that fleeting sense of liberation, that glimpse of something bigger than yourself. You think, this is it. I'm waking up. But what if, at that very moment, when you believe you're becoming free, you've actually stepped into a subtler kind of obedience? What if enlightenment itself can become a leash? Not through force, but through reverence. Not through chains, but through ritual. This is the Enlightenment obedience trap, the paradox where the path to ultimate freedom leads, silently, into yet another system of control. It starts innocently. You're searching for something real, something beyond the noise. The world has failed you with its hollow victories and loud emptiness. So you turn inward. You find a teacher, a book, a practice. They speak of peace, unity, stillness. They say, let go of attachment, let go of self. And it makes sense. It feels right. But soon the ideas become doctrine. You learn there is a right way to awaken, a posture, a phrase, a belief system, a lineage. And if you question it too loudly, they say, you're resisting. You're still trapped in ego. Keep practicing, surrender more. So you obey, not because you're forced, but because the alternative is unworthiness. You want to be pure, and you want to be free. You want to become the person they say you already are. If only you'd go deeper, meditate harder, dissolve more completely. And the deeper you go, the more subtle the rules become. Don't speak too boldly. Don't ask the wrong questions. Don't doubt the teacher. Don't break the silence. Enlightenment, you are told, is only for those who stay humble, receptive, disciplined, grateful. It sounds noble, but slowly your thoughts begin to censor themselves. You start to shrink your instincts to fit the mold of the awakened self. You adopt the tone, the smile, the non-reactive gaze. You say, all is one, even when you're hurting. You say, there is no self, even when your needs are crying out. You say, everything happens as it should, even when injustice burns right in front of you, because that's what enlightened people do. That's the role now. That's the character you've become. And all the while, there is a hierarchy, spoken or unspoken. The teacher, the master, the guru, the lineage holder, the head monk, the awakened influencer. They sit just a little higher. Their words carry weight. Their silence feels like a judgment. You want their approval, but you call it transmission. You crave their attention, but you call it seeking presence. You suppress your own clarity, because it doesn't match theirs. This isn't just in ashrams or monasteries. It happens in yoga studios, spiritual communities, wellness retreats, even online. You enter seeking liberation, but you find subtle rules wrapped in cosmic language. You find behavior codes hidden behind alignment. You find judgment disguised as higher vibration. The whole structure smiles gently, nods wisely, and watches whether you stay in line. This is not to say there is no truth in the teachings. There is. Stillness is real. Compassion is transformative. Ego can blind you. But when truth is paired with unquestioned hierarchy, when practice becomes performance, when surrender becomes self-erasure, freedom becomes obedience. You're not awakening. You're conforming to someone else's version of awakening. The most dangerous prisons are the ones that don't feel like prisons, because they offer meaning, because they offer peace, because they feel sacred. And so, you offer yourself willingly, unaware that the price may be your authenticity, your instincts, your voice. And here's the haunting truth. Obedience in spiritual systems often feels like progress, because doubt decreases. Suffering dulls. Everything starts to feel more tolerable, not because you've seen through illusion, but because you've numbed your rebellion. You're not transcending, you're adapting. Real awakening is not always still. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it burns. It questions what you were told even by those you revere. It challenges the form, not just the formless. It asks, who decided this was the path? Why must I obey to be free? What if my truth doesn't fit your scriptures? Real freedom doesn't look the same for everyone. It doesn't always sit cross-legged. It doesn't always smile. It doesn't always speak in soft voices. Real freedom might say no. It might walk away from the temple. It might call out the teacher. It might cry. It might dance. It might rage. And it might look like madness to those still bound by the performance of peace. So, if you find yourself walking a spiritual path, ask yourself, who am I becoming? Who am I trying to please? Who defines what awakening looks like here? If the answer is always someone else, if the structure cannot tolerate your questions, then you are not being liberated. You are being shaped. Spirituality should not demand your obedience. It should empower your sovereignty. It should not silence your instincts. It should sharpen them. It should not make you smaller. It should burn through every false role until only your raw, real presence remains. The Enlightenment. Obedience trap is quiet. It comes dressed in white robes and gentle tones. But inside, it wants your loyalty more than your liberation. It wants your alignment more than your aliveness. But your soul remembers a deeper truth. It was never meant to kneel at someone else's feet forever. It was meant to rise, to ask, to laugh, to break the mold, and to walk away when necessary. So bow if it's real. Sit in silence if it heals. But don't forget, the moment you feel like you must, the moment your freedom depends on compliance, that's the moment to pause, to question, to remember that even the most sacred systems can become cages, and the truest awakening might just be the moment you stop obeying. The inner voice mask. You call it instinct, a gut feeling, a whisper from somewhere deeper than thought. You say, it just felt right, or something told me not to go there. You trust that voice because it feels ancient, immediate, undeniable, like a compass that's always pointed true north. But what if that inner voice isn't pure? What if it's not some divine force or primal truth, but a carefully constructed mask, layered with trauma, training, praise, punishment, and repetition? What if your so-called intuition is just your past speaking in disguise? This is the mask of the inner voice, and it is convincing. It sounds like you. It moves like you. It feels like something sacred. But peel it back, and you start to see the scaffolding underneath, the rules you were taught as a child, the fears you learned to carry in silence, the rewards that shaped your decisions, the pain that rerouted your desires. Your gut isn't untouched wisdom. It's memory, emotion, and survival, encoded so deeply that it bypasses thought and speaks directly through sensation. You avoid confrontation and call it peace. But maybe it's just the echo of being punished for speaking up. You gravitate towards certain people and call it chemistry, but maybe it's the familiar shape of someone who once withheld love. You chase success and call it passion. But maybe it's the hunger to finally be seen, praised, chosen, something you were taught to equate with worth. The problem isn't that your inner voice is lying. It's that it learned its language in a house you didn't build, from teachers who may have meant well or may have broken you, from patterns that were necessary to survive but aren't meant for thriving. The voice you call instinct is fluent in the grammar of your past. It speaks from the nervous system, from the scar tissue, from years of learning what is safe, what is dangerous, and what will get you love. Psychologists call it implicit memory. Your body remembers things your conscious mind has forgotten. It reacts before you understand why. Your stomach turns when you're in danger, but also when you're triggered by an old emotional wound. Your chest tightens when you're about to make a mistake, but also when you're about to break a rule that was never fair to begin with. You feel a no or a yes in your bones, but those bones were shaped by a world that didn't always have your best interest in mind. Even praise can distort the voice. If you were rewarded for being quiet, you might mistake silence for wisdom. If you were praised for self-sacrifice, you might feel selfish for setting a boundary. If you were taught that obedience is good and questioning is dangerous, your inner voice will urge you to comply, even when your truth is screaming beneath it. The repetition forms grooves, neural pathways carved by years of being told what to value, who to be, what not to feel. And so, when that gut instinct arises, it may not be guiding you toward truth. It may be guiding you toward safety, comfort, or approval. You think you're making a bold choice, but maybe you're just avoiding abandonment. Maybe you're just playing out a script you didn't know was written for you. This doesn't mean your inner voice is useless. It means it deserves examination. You don't silence it. You study it. You sit with it and ask, where did this voice learn to speak like this? Who taught it this tone? What does it protect me from? And what does it prevent me from becoming? Sometimes the voice says, don't go, and it's wisdom. Sometimes it says, don't go, and it's fear dressed as foresight. Sometimes it urges you forward, and it's truth. Sometimes it urges you forward, and it's a desperate need to prove you're not broken. The voice is always there, but it's not always right. The work is not to erase the voice, but to unmask it, to trace it back, piece by piece, to differentiate instinct from imprint, to ask whether this feeling is rooted in love or in the desperate hunger for it, whether it's courage or just a performance, whether it's truth or the echo of a lie you've heard so many times you began calling it your own. This takes time, it takes silence, it takes courage to pause before acting, to notice the feeling and hold it up to the light. You may not always find a clean answer. The voice may be tangled, half wisdom, half wound, but even that awareness is power. Because in that space, you stop being a puppet of your past and begin becoming the author of your present. And with time, the voice begins to change. As you heal, it softens. As you unlearn, it shifts. As you listen more closely, it begins to sound less like a reflex and more like a guide you can trust. A voice not shaped by fear or approval, but by clarity, groundedness, presence. Not the masked voice of your old survival, but the raw sound of your real self. So the next time your inner voice speaks, don't just obey it. Don't just reject it. Ask it where it came from. Ask it what it's afraid of. Ask it who taught it to sound that way. And then choose, not by reaction, but by awareness. Your gut feeling is not a prophet. It is a pattern. And patterns can be broken. The inner voice may wear many masks, but beneath them, there is something true. And the more you listen with discernment, the more that truth will finally have the space to speak in a voice that is fully and only your own. Or the regret prediction trap. You follow the rules. You weigh your words. You make the right choice, not because it feels right, but because you don't want to feel the burn of regret. You live in the future, scanning possibilities, calculating losses before they happen. You sidestep the path you truly want, afraid it might end in shame. You obey, comply, delay, because someone once said, "You'll regret that." And now, the voice echoes inside you, louder than your own. This is the regret prediction trap, the quiet prison where your life becomes a series of calculated compromises built to avoid a pain that was never originally yours. Regret is real. It's sharp. It stings when you remember what could have been, what you didn't say, what you didn't do. So, your mind becomes a prediction machine, desperately trying to see around corners. If I leave this job, I'll regret it. If I love this person, I'll regret it. If I speak this truth, I'll regret it. The fear of future pain paralyzes present action. But here's the twist. Most of those fears weren't born from your own mistakes. They were planted. You inherited them. From parents who warned you. From teachers who punished risk. From cultures that built their morality around control. Don't disappoint us. Don't waste your potential. Don't chase silly dreams. They didn't say it out of cruelty. They said it out of fear, passed down from their own haunted decisions. Generations warning generations, embedding regret like a virus in your internal compass. So now you obey rules not because they're right, but because they're safe. You avoid pain, not because it's certain, but because you've been trained to expect it. Regret becomes a leash, and the leash starts to feel like wisdom. This is where the trap tightens. You confuse fear of regret with truth. You confuse risk aversion with responsibility. You confuse quiet desperation with maturity. And then, you watch your own life go dim. Not with dramatic failure, but with missed chances, muted desires, safe roads that lead nowhere. You justify it with logic. I'm being realistic. I'm playing it smart. But deep down, a voice whispers, "This isn't who I wanted to be." That voice is the part of you untouched by the trap. Psychologists have studied this loop. They call it anticipated regret, the tendency to avoid decisions that might, in hindsight, feel wrong. But here's the catch. We're terrible at predicting what we'll actually regret. People often imagine regretting boldness, but later, it's the missed chances that haunt them. The job they didn't take, the apology they never gave, the love they left unspoken. Yet, we keep obeying the fear. Why? Because the rules were taught with emotional weight. Early in life, you saw someone break a rule and get hurt, shamed, abandoned, punished. Maybe it was you, maybe someone close. That moment fused fear to memory. Now, when you stand at a threshold, truth or silence, leap or safety, you don't just hear your own voice, you hear theirs, the warning. The ghost of their regret, still echoing in your nervous system. You say, I don't want to make the same mistake. But what if that mistake wasn't even yours to learn? This is what makes the regret prediction trap so dangerous. It hides behind caution, responsibility, emotional intelligence. But in truth, it's someone else's nightmare playing out in your decision-making. Their fall became your fence. And the worst part? It works. You avoid the imagined pain. You dodge the uncertain risk. You stay safe. But the cost is everything that might have made your life yours. Real agency, real desire, real freedom. So how do you escape? You don't destroy regret. You face it. You stop treating it like a monster and start treating it like a mirror. Regret isn't your enemy, it's a signal. But it must be yours, not borrowed, not inherited, not someone else's trauma pretending to be your conscience. You learn to ask, whose voice is this? Who taught me this fear? Whose pain am I trying to prevent? Mine or theirs? You won't always have the answer, but even asking the question breaks the spell. It creates a sliver of space between fear and obedience. And in that space, you might find the courage to act anyway, to risk the regret you were told to fear because silence might be worse. Think of every person who ever changed the world. Every artist, leader, outcast, rebel. They were warned too. They were told, you'll regret this. Many did. Some didn't. But the ones who mattered, the ones who became themselves, were willing to carry the risk of regret if it meant staying true to what called them. You have that choice too. To live a smaller life shaped by other people's warnings, or to risk a larger life defined by your own becoming. Regret is part of being human. But the deeper regret isn't failure. It's forgetting who you were before fear became your compass. You don't need to destroy your past. You just need to stop letting it write your future. Because the life you're afraid to reach for might hurt. But the one you're afraid to leave behind already is. The value inheritance loop. You fight for justice. You speak of love. You hold fast to your faith. These are your values, the pillars of your character, the compass that guides your choices. You feel them in your chest like a moral pulse, a deep knowing of what's right and what's wrong. But slow down. Ask yourself, where did those values come from? Who decided what justice looks like, what love means, what faith should feel like? Did you build those beliefs from scratch? Or did you inherit them like hand-me-down clothes, altered just enough to feel personal, but still stitched with someone else's thread? This is the value inheritance loop, the quiet cycle where you live and die by ideals that were passed to you, not chosen by you. And because they feel righteous, you rarely stop to question where they began. Most values arrive before memory. Long before you could question, you were absorbing. A parent's anger, a teacher's praise, a neighbor's silence. You learned what got approval. You learned what triggered punishment. You learned to call some people good and others bad, not through logic, but through repetition. You didn't choose the lessons. You simply absorbed them, like air. Your idea of justice may have come from cartoons, from who the hero punished, from who the villain was allowed to be. You learned that justice is about punishment, or maybe redemption, that some crimes matter and others get ignored. And as you grew, the story deepened, but rarely changed at the root. You were taught to fight for freedom, but only certain freedoms. You were taught to care for others, but only certain others. The framework of your truth was inherited from history books written by victors, stories told by survivors, rules laid out by systems that needed obedience more than clarity. And then there's love. Maybe you believe in unconditional love, or romantic love, or sacrificial love. But did you ever stop to ask, who taught me what love looks like, what it demands, what it tolerates? Some people inherit love laced with obligation. Others inherit it as currency, earned, withheld, bartered. You might believe love should last forever, even when it hurts, because someone once said that leaving means failure. Or you might believe love should be wild and boundaryless, because no one ever taught you how to stay. Faith, too, arrives early. Not just religious faith, but faith in systems, in science, in governments, in the self. You learned who to trust. You learned what was sacred. You learned what could not be questioned. And once belief calcifies, it doesn't feel like inheritance. It feels like truth. But truth unexamined is just loyalty in disguise. The value inheritance loop isn't a lie, it's a survival strategy. Societies pass values to preserve order, protect the group, maintain identity. Families pass them to feel safe, to belong, to give meaning to chaos. And you absorb them to stay loved, to stay included, to stay sane. But at some point, what helped you survive may begin to shape your cage. You march for causes that were labeled righteous before you understood what righteous meant. You reject ideas because someone you trusted raised an eyebrow once. You defend traditions without realizing you've never looked beneath them. You hold on to beliefs that comfort your identity but quietly limit your growth. And here's the paradox. Even your rebellion may be inherited. The child of the devout becomes a passionate atheist, but still plays inside the old frame, arguing against the same God, the same books, the same lines. The activist who resists their culture may still use its language, its symbols, its morality, unwittingly carrying the same box they think they escaped. So ask yourself, what values would I hold if I were born into a different century? A different class? A different skin? A different language? What if you had grown up under a different sky, with different myths, with different rules for what a good person does? Would your justice still look the same? Would your love still sound familiar? Would your faith survive translation? This isn't to say your values are wrong. Many of them may be beautiful, hard-won, even universal. But beauty doesn't make them truly yours. You have to dig. You have to examine not just the surface of belief, but its origin. Was this value born from understanding or just tradition? Does it still serve your soul or just your community? Is it guiding you toward growth or chaining you to loyalty? This kind of reflection is uncomfortable. It feels like betrayal. You fear that if you pull the thread, the whole sweater will unravel. But some sweaters are too tight. Some have holes you've ignored for years, and some were never warm to begin with. To escape the value inheritance loop, you don't have to discard everything. You don't have to become empty. You have to become conscious. Keep the values that still pulse with meaning when you strip away the voices that gave them to you. Let go of the ones that shrink you, that shame you, that no longer match the truth you've earned through living. Because here's the most haunting part. You can live your whole life thinking you were fighting for truth, when really, you were fighting to preserve a role you inherited. You can sacrifice, suffer, even die for a cause, and never realize it was never yours. But now, you're aware. You can step back. You can ask, what do I believe and why? Who gave me these beliefs, and what did they want from me? Do they still fit the world I see? Your values are not chains unless you forget to question them. They are not truths unless you've tested them. They are not yours unless you've watched them burn and still reached for them, ashes in hand, because something in them rings deeper than memory. You are not here to play out someone else's legacy. You are here to forge your own. But to do that, you must risk the silence that follows when you let go of borrowed convictions. Only then can the voice underneath begin to speak. And when it does, it might be quieter than you expected. But it will finally be yours. The reward conditioning chain. You were trained long before you could speak. Long before you could name the feeling of shame or explain the rush of pride. You learned that certain smiles meant safety, that certain silences meant danger. You learned when to sit still, when to be small, when to say what they wanted to hear. And each time you obeyed, you were rewarded. A smile, a treat, a pat on the head, approval, love. It didn't feel like control. It felt like being good. And so the chain began. It wasn't metal. It didn't need to be. Just praise and punishment, handed out in just the right amounts, at just the right times. Speak too loudly, the room falls quiet. Cry in public, a scolding glare. Question a rule, the reward vanishes. But nod, smile, behave, conform. And the world opens its arms. You are told you are mature, responsible, smart, worthy. You didn't choose this training. It wrapped around you like air. Parents, teachers, religious leaders, coaches, every system you touched had a silent logic. Conform and be safe, deviate and be alone. It was never said like that. It didn't have to be. The more you obeyed, the smoother your life became. The more you complied, the more doors opened. You started editing yourself before anyone asked. You filtered your emotions, smoothed out your edges, hid your curiosity behind polite silence. And every time you did, the world smiled a little wider. Eventually, you stopped noticing the edits. You forgot who you were before the feedback loop began. You called it growing up. You called it being normal. You called it success. But the truth is harder. You were conditioned, not just to follow rules, but to crave the reward for following them. And now, you mistake that craving for comfort. You think you prefer the safe job, the quiet apartment, the same routines. You think you enjoy being liked, even if it means never telling the truth. You think you value peace, when what you really fear is punishment, rejection, shame, the cold of being alone with your unfiltered self. And when you do deviate, when you speak too honestly, say no too loudly, or try something that doesn't fit the script, the old fear returns. The guilt, the tension in your stomach, the quiet panic that says, what if they stop loving me? What if I lose everything I was trained to need? So you call the cage comfort. You decorate it with achievements. You post photos from inside it. You turn it into a routine, a rhythm, a home. But deep down, you know. You know how small you've made yourself to keep it. You know how many thoughts you've buried, how many feelings you've rewritten, how many dreams you abandoned before they could make noise. And the chain doesn't stop at childhood. The reward system just evolves. Schools give way to corporations. Corporations give way to relationships. Even friendships can become part of the loop, praising you when you're convenient, going silent when you step out of line. You begin to police yourself so well that no one has to punish you anymore. You punish yourself. You suppress your instincts before they're even born. This is why growth feels painful. Because to grow, you must deviate. And to deviate, you must risk losing the rewards. You must risk being misunderstood, unloved, mocked, cast out. You must risk discomfort. And for someone raised in a cage of comfort, that risk can feel like death. But real life, real selfhood, exists outside the conditioning. You may never be fully free of the chain. It shaped your brain, your habits, your sense of what love feels like. But you can see it. And when you see it, you can pause. You can ask, is this choice mine, or is it the one I was trained to make? Do I really want this, or am I chasing praise again? Freedom begins not with rebellion, but with recognition. It begins when you feel the tug of the chain and decide to move anyway. When you speak the truth, knowing it won't be rewarded. When you choose discomfort because it aligns with who you are, not who they told you to be. The system profits from your obedience, but your soul, your actual living soul, was not built to survive on treats and punishments. It was built to create, to risk, to stretch, to defy the script and write a new one. You were not born to be conditioned. You were born to awaken. And when you finally name the cage, not as comfort, not as success, but as a beautifully disguised prison, you may just find the strength to walk out. Not for applause, not for approval, but because for the first time, your movement is your own. The chemical self. Paradox. You wake up one morning and feel heavy. Not tired, heavy. The world feels further away, like you're wrapped in fog. You can't explain it. Nothing bad has happened. No one hurt you. But your chest is tight, your thoughts are slow, and your energy is gone. So you tell yourself, something's wrong with me. But what if nothing is wrong, and everything just is? This is the chemical self paradox. The unsettling truth that your sense of identity, your moods, your focus, your cravings, your joy, your rage, all of it, might not be the voice of some inner soul, but simply the consequence of chemistry. Not a self steering the ship, but a ship reacting to weather systems it doesn't control. We love to believe we are pilots, conscious agents, rational beings making decisions, and leading lives from a stable inner throne. But that throne isn't solid. It's liquid. It's flooded with neurotransmitters, shaped by hormones, jolted by glucose, numbed by serotonin dips, lit on fire by dopamine floods. Yourself, the one that laughs, breaks down, regrets, desires, might just be the shape your chemicals take in a given moment. Consider how easily you change when you're hungry, or tired, or heartbroken. The words you choose, the thoughts you entertain, the way you treat people, all shift depending on what's happening inside your body. You feel irritable, anxious, impulsive, and you think, that's me today. But is it? Or is it your cortisol levels rising, your dopamine tank running low, your frontal cortex taking a temporary break while the limbic system surges? We don't like to talk about this. We want to believe our decisions come from character, our morality from belief, our strength from will. But strip away just a few milligrams of serotonin, and suddenly your outlook turns bleak. Add a little adrenaline, and your fears sharpen into certainty. One chemical, just one, and your perception of the world changes. What you care about changes. Who you think you are changes. You are not piloting the ship. You are the ship. And the ship is reacting to environment, to memory, to blood sugar, to subtle flickers of electric current. Take love. That overwhelming pull, the aching need, the flood of emotion when you see their face, or hear their voice, or lose their presence. That isn't just poetry. It's oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, vasopressin. Chemicals binding you to another human like ropes across neurons. You call it destiny. Biology calls it reward circuitry. Take grief. That collapsing feeling in your chest, the weight behind your eyes, the way time warps around you. That's not just loss, it's withdrawal. It's your brain rewiring itself after being chemically fused to someone who is now gone. You feel broken, not because something supernatural was torn away, but because the chemical scaffolding that held you up has shattered. This doesn't mean your feelings aren't real. They're real. They're just not pure. They're not untouched by biology. They're reactions. Evolution's language etched into your bloodstream, speaking through your thoughts without asking permission. And what about clarity? Those rare moments when everything just makes sense. When you feel inspired, focused, untouchable. That's neurochemical too. You're riding a surge of norepinephrine, maybe some caffeine, maybe the subtle mix of external validation and internal rhythm hitting just right. You think, this is the real me, but a few hours later, you're cloudy again. The light fades, and you wonder where that version of you went. This is the paradox. You feel like one person, but you are many versions, each shaped by invisible molecules pulsing through your brain. You believe you're thinking freely, but your thoughts are shaped by the chemistry reacting to your last meal, your last sleep cycle, your last argument. So what now? Do you despair? Do you give up and say, it's all chemicals, nothing matters? No, you do the opposite. You realize that knowing it's all chemistry gives you the power to watch it, to track the tides, to learn your rhythms, to say, right now, I'm angry, but maybe it's because I haven't eaten. Maybe I don't need to act on this thought. You begin to catch the illusion before it traps you. You stop mistaking a passing internal storm for eternal truth. This awareness isn't detachment, it's wisdom. It's the beginning of self-authorship, not because you can control every chemical, but because you can learn to surf them instead of drowning. You can design your days to stabilize your mind. You can use food, sleep, connection, movement, stillness, all to create better internal weather. You may not pilot the ship, but you can chart the sea, and perhaps most importantly, this truth invites compassion. When you understand that people are fighting invisible battles in their own neurochemistry, it becomes harder to judge. The rude stranger, the distant friend, the anxious child, they're all reacting to storms inside. Just like you, just like all of us. You are not your chemicals, but you are not separate from them either. You are the flashpoint where physics becomes feeling, where molecules become meaning. You are the storm and the one learning to stand in it. And in that fragile space between impulse and awareness, that's where your freedom lives. So the next time you feel like a stranger to yourself, when your mind says one thing but your heart twists another way, when you snap and don't know why, or sink and don't know how to climb back out, pause. Breathe. Remember, this is chemistry. This is reaction. This is temporary. And above all, remember this. You are not piloting the ship, but you are learning to understand it. And that's the beginning of true power, not in escaping your biology, but in living wisely within it. The simulated choice effect. You think you're free because you can choose. You pick your clothes, your job, your relationships. You decide where to live, who to love, what to believe. Every day you make choices and they feel infinite, personalized, empowering. But look closer, and something strange begins to emerge. Your freedom, while real, is bounded. Like a video game character in an open-world simulation, you can move in any direction, but only within the map. You can choose your outfit, your weapons, your strategy, but you can't rewrite the code. This is the simulated choice effect, the experience of freedom inside a carefully constructed sandbox. It doesn't feel like a trap. In fact, it feels like the opposite. The world is overflowing with options, endless combinations of lifestyles, careers, ideologies, aesthetics. You can dye your hair, change your pronouns, switch religions, move cities, reboot your identity over and over. But every one of these transformations happens inside a box you didn't build. A cultural framework, a social script, a technological architecture that decides what choices are available to you in the first place. Like a player in a video game, you're encouraged to explore, but the walls are invisible. You don't see the boundaries until you hit them, until you ask a question that isn't allowed, pursue a path that wasn't programmed, or challenge a value that the system depends on. Then, the illusion falters, the music skips, the screen shakes, and you're reminded this was never a blank canvas. It was a playground, a controlled simulation where the appearance of agency is the primary tool of control. This effect is not about conspiracy. It's about design. Education teaches you how to think, but only within certain paradigms. Social media offers infinite expression, but only through curated algorithms. Political systems give you 2 or 3 parties, multiple policies, fierce debates, but always within a structure that was pre-decided before you were born. Even rebellion has its limits, often absorbed into fashion, into branding, into market trends that sell you your own resistance in digestible pieces. You say you're choosing, but are you? You selected from 5 streaming platforms, a dozen news outlets, 100 careers. But the foundational code, how your time is valued, what success means, what's worth fearing or desiring, was written without your input. You were handed a character sheet at birth. Your name, your nationality, your body, your language. From there, your life has been a series of selections inside a menu you didn't build. And still, it feels like freedom. Because you do make choices. You shape your path, create meaning, pursue joy. You navigate the sandbox as best you can. But the simulated choice effect is not about denying your agency. It's about questioning the framework. Who built the sandbox? Who benefits from the illusion of infinite paths that all lead to the same end? What happens to those who try to leave the game entirely? Think of the worker who questions the 40-hour week, the student who asks why debt is the price of education, the citizen who questions the nature of borders. These aren't choices within the system. They are attempts to question the system itself, and those who do often find themselves punished, excluded, silenced. The simulation doesn't like to be seen. Its power lies in remaining invisible, because true control doesn't require force. It only requires the illusion of freedom. If you believe you're choosing, you won't question the limits. If you feel free, you won't ask who built the rules. This is the genius of the sandbox. It makes obedience feel like autonomy. You chase goals you didn't define, perform identities that were scripted, measure success by metrics someone else invented, and you're applauded for it, rewarded, promoted, celebrated, for staying within the boundaries. But something in you knows. You felt the edges. That quiet voice that wonders, is this all there is? The ache of doing everything right and still feeling incomplete. The sense that no matter how much you change your look, your job, your label, the foundation stays the same. That maybe the choices you're making aren't changing the game, just rearranging the pieces. So what do you do in a sandbox that feels like freedom but operates like a cage? You begin by noticing, by paying attention to the boundaries, not just where they are, but how they make you feel. You start asking who designed the map you're navigating, what assumptions go unchallenged, what choices are never offered, who disappears when they refuse to play by the rules. Then you experiment. You test the walls, not to break them with force, but to see them clearly. You create art that doesn't fit the algorithm. You speak truths that won't trend. You ask questions that make people uncomfortable. You begin to live not by choosing differently, but by choosing consciously, with your eyes open, with your own definitions of meaning, even if they don't fit inside the menu. The simulated choice effect doesn't mean you are powerless. It means your power is deeper than preference, stronger than customization. Your real agency begins not in the game, but in your awareness of the game. And from that place, you can begin to reshape not just your character, but the code itself. So the next time you feel free, pause. Ask, was this freedom? Or just another setting? Another costume? Another corridor in the maze? And if it is, dare to look for the hidden exit, not to escape the world, but to find the place inside you that never needed permission to be real. The nested self-illusion. You wake up and you say, this is me. You make a decision. You think a thought. You feel a flash of emotion and call it yours. You move through life assuming there's a center behind it all. An I pulling the strings, making the calls, steering the ship. But if you look closely, if you trace that voice, that chooser, that observer, something unsettling begins to unfold. The you that chooses turns out to be just another mask, layered over other masks, influence upon influence, memory upon memory, language, culture, mimicry, a self wearing a self wearing a self. This is the nested self-illusion, the idea that the person you think you are is not the original, but only the latest narrator in a long, recursive script. Let's start with your thoughts. You believe they're your own, but what language do they appear in? Did you choose it? No. It was given to you. Each word you think with was taught by someone else. That language limits what you can imagine. It defines the edges of your inner world. There are entire concepts, emotions, insights, truths. You may never think because the words don't exist in your vocabulary. Already the self is built within a cage it didn't design. Now look at your preferences, your style, your sense of humor, your taste in music, in love, in morality. Did you invent them? Or were they mimicked, modeled, rewarded by others until they calcified into you? You like what you like. But would you have liked it if you'd grown up in another country, another family, another century? Or would you have become someone else entirely, while still calling it me? Psychologists call this introjection, the process of internalizing the voices, judgments, and expectations of those around you. You didn't just inherit eye color and DNA. You inherited value systems, social reflexes, shame patterns. You copied your parents' anxiety, your teacher's approval language, your culture's definition of success. These were not conscious choices. They were layers, nesting dolls stacked quietly within you. Even memory, the thread you use to stitch your identity, is not reliable. It doesn't play back like a film. It rewrites itself every time it's recalled. It shifts to match your current emotional state. It edits out the inconvenient, exaggerates the meaningful, forgets the subtle. And yet, you use this fluid, biased, ever-shifting narrative to define who you are. I remember what happened. I know who I am. But what you remember isn't what happened. It's what survived. And behind all of this, language, mimicry, memory, there is still another mask, the biological one, your brain chemistry. Your temperament, the emotional thermostat you didn't choose. Some people wake up leaning toward joy, others toward dread. This isn't a personality, it's a preset. How much of you is simply the echo of serotonin, dopamine, cortisol, flickering through neural pathways built by genetics and early experience? You say, but I choose? Do you? Neuroscience experiments have shown that your brain registers a decision before you consciously decide it. That is, your body already knows what you will do, seconds before you do. The feeling of choosing is real, but it may just be the brain narrating a decision it already made, like a sports announcer pretending to be the coach. So where, then, is the real you? Is it the watcher behind the masks? Or is the watcher just another mask? More subtle, more convincing, but no less constructed. This is the nested illusion. Every time you peel back a layer of the self, you find another story, another influence, another mask pretending to be the origin. And yet, you keep looking. Because to admit there is no single true self behind the curtain feels like annihilation. And still, something watches. Something asks. Something wonders who is asking. This isn't just philosophical poetry. It's a lived reality. Think of the moments you feel fractured, when your actions don't match your values, when you feel one thing, say another, and do a third. When a version of you says, I hate this, while another part continues doing it. These moments aren't failures. They're glimpses of the nested selves in conflict, competing scripts trying to take the stage. Or think of those moments where you change, not gradually, but suddenly. A crisis rewrites your priorities. A book cracks your worldview open. A new relationship awakens parts of you you'd buried. Where was the real you then? The one before? The one after? Or neither? We often think of identity like a statue, carved and solid. But it's more like a dance of shadows, cast by layers of history, biology, environment, emotion. Each moment is a new mask stepping forward, and behind it, more masks, shifting endlessly. So, what do you do with this? You don't panic. You don't collapse into nihilism. You get curious. You stop asking, who am I really? And start asking, who is speaking right now? What voice is this? Where did it come from? What does it want? You notice the masks. You question the reflexes. You learn to hold your identity like open water, not as a fixed point, but as a flow you can surf. And in that space, not in the search for a true self, but in the awareness of the nesting, you find something that feels more honest than any rigid identity ever could. Not certainty, but presence. Not definition, but freedom. Because maybe the real you isn't behind the masks. Maybe the real you is the one watching the masks move and deciding, moment by moment, which ones still fit and which ones you're finally ready to set down. The magnetized outcome pull. You make a decision. You tell yourself it's the right one. Maybe it's who to love, what job to take, what to chase, what to leave, when to speak, when to stay silent. It feels right, like intuition, like clarity. You feel drawn to it, as if pulled by some invisible gravity. And maybe you think, this is my truth, my choice, my path. But slow down. What if that pull isn't pure? What if it's not clarity, but magnetism? What if you're not moving toward what you want, but being pulled by what you can't see? This is the magnetized outcome pull, the illusion that your decisions are free, when in fact, they may be orbiting hidden forces. Your need for validation, your fear of abandonment, your old wounds, your desire to rewrite the past. Think of a magnet beneath a table. You roll a coin across the surface. It looks like it's choosing its direction. But you know better. Something under the surface is guiding its every move. Now, imagine the same thing happening inside you. You say yes to something because it feels exciting. But was it truly excitement? Or was it the adrenaline rush of being wanted, chosen, seen? Was it a yes to the moment, or a yes to the childhood self who never felt enough? You walk away from something because it feels wrong. But was it really wrong? Or did it just remind you of a wound you've never fully healed? Were you protecting yourself from danger or from discomfort? You chase a dream, fiercely, relentlessly. But was the dream ever yours? Or are you trying to earn love, prove your worth, fulfill a role someone else once praised? Most decisions aren't made in the light. They're made in the dark rooms of the psyche, where old emotions hum like machines, where unhealed moments from long ago still whisper, be good, be safe, be loved, don't be left again. Attachment is a magnet. You move toward what feels familiar, even if it hurts. You mistake comfort for truth. You run back to what you swore you'd escape simply because it reminds you of home, not the safe home, but the emotional blueprint you learned to survive. Fear is a magnet. You move away from change, from risk, from exposure. You sabotage the thing you want most, not because you don't deserve it, but because you've never known how to exist in a life that doesn't hurt. Validation is a magnet. You shape your choices around applause. You call it success, but inside, it feels hollow. You keep running, but the finish line keeps moving. You're not building a life. You're performing one, hoping someone claps loud enough to make you feel real. And trauma, unseen, unspoken, is the strongest magnet of all. It teaches your body to flinch from the unfamiliar, to brace against joy, to seek chaos, because chaos feels like proof that you're still alive. So, the next time you feel drawn, stop, breathe. Ask not just, where am I going, but what's pulling me there? Ask not just, do I want this, but who inside me is doing the wanting? You might discover that what you thought was intuition was actually conditioning, That what felt like destiny was a magnet shaped by pain. That what you fought to keep was only ever a stand-in for something you lost long ago. This doesn't make your decisions wrong. It makes them human. It means your compass needs recalibrating. Not because you're broken, but because you've been navigating with someone else's map. True clarity doesn't pull. It doesn't pressure. It doesn't come wrapped in urgency or soaked in old emotion. True clarity is quiet. It arrives when the magnets are seen, named, and gently set aside. That's the work. Not to kill the pull, but to understand it. To hold each magnet in your hand and ask, are you still serving me? Or am I serving you? It takes courage to do this. To walk toward a decision not because it pulls you, but because you've stopped moving long enough to finally choose. Because sometimes, the thing that draws you the strongest is the exact thing meant to be resisted. And the thing that feels uncertain, quiet, almost invisible, that might be the real path, the one not carved by magnets but made by you, step by step, without the tug of the past. So ask yourself now, in this moment, am I choosing or am I being pulled? And then, listen for the silence beneath the noise. That's where real freedom begins. The chaos calibration problem. You break the rules, and it feels like flight. You quit the job, burn the bridge, say what's been buried too long. You run into the night with your hands raised and say, finally I'm free. No more plans, no more expectations, no more neatly boxed versions of who you're supposed to be. Chaos feels like rebellion, like you've escaped the machine, and now you finally get to breathe your own air. But then something strange happens. Patterns start appearing in the noise. You keep choosing the same kind of mess, the same kind of people, the same highs, the same crashes. Your freedom begins to loop, and deep down, you begin to wonder, is this chaos really mine, or just another design I didn't realize I was following? This is the chaos calibration problem. The illusion that disorder is freedom, when it too is shaped. When even your rebellion was pre-approved by deeper forces. When even your most chaotic moments have coordinates hidden underneath them. Because chaos doesn't mean randomness. Not in your mind, not in your life. Your chaos is calibrated by memory, trauma, repetition, unresolved patterns. You're not just acting wild. You're repeating a rhythm, one that started long before you called it yours. Maybe your chaos is loud anger, or impulsive silence. Maybe it's self-destruction dressed as spontaneity, or addiction dressed as passion, or avoidance dressed as independence. You tell yourself it's freedom, but it's just a new cage with softer walls, a kind of disorder that still keeps you predictable. You bounce between jobs, between lovers, between identities. Each time you say, this is who I really am, but the turbulence follows a script. You're not choosing chaos, you're reenacting it, playing out an old loop with new names, new cities, new disguises, but the feeling, the fallout, familiar. Psychology calls it reenactment. Your nervous system searches not for peace, but for what's familiar, even if that familiarity is pain. So you run from control, thinking you're escaping, but you're just sprinting in circles inside a storm shaped by your past. And the most haunting part? It still feels free. That's how well the illusion is made. Because when you grow up inside systems that punish deviation and reward obedience, even the wrong kind of chaos can feel like liberation. The spiral feels better than the cage, so you confuse collapse with autonomy. But freedom isn't found in chaos, just as it's not found in rigid order. Both are environments. Both are shaped. Both are maps handed to you by others, dressed as instincts. Even your outbursts, your disappearances, your midnight escapes, these too are echoes. Scripts, emotional rituals passed down and dressed up. Look at the chaos closely. Trace its curve. Does it lead to a new version of yourself, or back to the same ground? Does it shake your soul awake, or just numb it differently? Does it challenge your core, or flatter your old wounds? Even disorder has a design. Even your wildest moves carry fingerprints of systems you didn't write. Family dynamics, inherited beliefs, survival habits. You rebel the way you were taught to rebel. You lose yourself in the same place every time. You scream in a language they taught you how to scream in. So what's the answer? Not perfect control, not surrender to anarchy, but awareness. Freedom begins when you notice the calibration, when you look at your chaos and ask, who taught me this? Why does this version of rebellion feel safe? Why do I crave noise when I get too close to silence? Sometimes, real freedom is quieter than you expected. Sometimes it's stillness, not eruption. Clarity, not confusion. It's not about avoiding structure or drowning in disorder, but choosing your own architecture. One that doesn't just break the rules, but rewrites the reason for having any at all. You can live a life that isn't controlled by systems, or by your desperate escape from them. A life where chaos isn't a default setting, where order isn't a punishment, where your choices aren't just reactions, but reflections of who you are when you finally get to choose without fear. That's not easy, because it means going deeper than the mess. It means sitting in discomfort without rushing to explode. It means looking at your patterns and grieving what they cost you. It means rewriting your instincts, not just your plans. The chaos calibration problem shows us a painful truth, that even the wildest life can be predictable, that even the free fall can be orchestrated. But it also reveals a path, that once you see the shape of your chaos, you can begin to move beyond it, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming honest. So ask yourself, when you break the rules, whose voice are you defying? When you run, what are you really escaping? And when you call it freedom, is it because you're free, or just because you're spinning in a loop too fast to stop and look? Freedom doesn't scream, it listens. And the moment you stop mistaking chaos for liberation, that's when the real journey begins. The location determines desire. You think your desires are yours, that they come from some inner truth, your essence, your will, your soul. You say, "This is who I am. This is what I want." But then something strange happens. You move to another city, another country, another circle of people, and the things you once craved begin to fade. New wants rise in their place. You shift, quietly, completely, and suddenly, your will doesn't look like yours anymore. This is the truth we rarely face. Location determines desire. Where you are shapes what you value, who you admire, what you chase, what you fear, what you call success. Your will isn't fixed, it's reactive. And it changes, not just with time, but with where you stand. You may not notice it while you're still in it. In your hometown, maybe ambition means status. Owning a house, getting married, making your family proud. So you want those things, and you call that drive yours. You think, "This is who I've always been." But then you travel. You land in a different city where people don't talk about mortgages and marriage, where people value freedom, art, identity, meaning, and without warning, your desires shift. You begin to crave expression more than security. You long for purpose instead of approval. You look back at who you were and feel like that version of you belonged to someone else. And maybe it did. Because the self doesn't live in isolation. It blooms in climate. It responds to temperature, to language, to rhythm, to hierarchy. Drop that same self into a new ecosystem and watch what happens. Watch how quickly it starts rewriting its list of desires. Not because it's false, but because it's flexible. That's not weakness, that's survival. We are social creatures. Our minds are mirrors. We learn what matters by what the tribe rewards. If the people around you celebrate wealth, you'll chase it. If they celebrate rebellion, you'll question more. If they reward obedience, you'll suppress your doubts. And all of this will feel like you. You won't feel like you're conforming. You'll feel like you're finally becoming who you were meant to be. That's the illusion. We mistake adaptation for destiny. And this is how cultures shape us without asking. In one place, beauty is thinness. In another, it's fullness. In one, you're admired for ambition. In another, for humility. In one, safety is having roots. In another, it's being able to run. So you begin to see that the location doesn't just shape how you act. It rewrites what you want. And desire is the compass of the self. Think about how much of your life has been directed by the architecture of your environment. What stores are nearby? What the people around you wear, eat, talk about? What's on the billboards? What's in the air? The temperature, the light, the smell. You don't chase silence until you live in noise. You don't crave warmth until you've known cold. You don't long for escape until your cage becomes visible. Even your internal voice, the one that says, "This is good," or "This is wrong," is not entirely yours. It's an echo, a reflection of the collective. You didn't invent your language of desire. You inherited it from your surroundings. So what does this mean? That nothing is real? That your identity is a fiction? Not quite. It means your identity is contextual, that your will is porous, that the self is a conversation between biology, memory, and geography. You are not static. You are situated. And that realization gives you a strange kind of freedom. Because once you know that desire is shaped by environment, you can begin to design that environment. You can choose your context with intention. You can say, I want different things, and then move geographically, socially, digitally, until your reflections change. You may not be able to will yourself into a new self, but you can step into a new world, and that world will start doing its work, quietly, relentlessly. Surround yourself with people who value discipline, and you'll stop craving chaos. Immerse yourself in circles that honor depth, and you'll tire of shallowness. Put yourself in places where kindness is currency, and watch your heart soften. The point is not to chase authenticity as if it were a fixed origin. The point is to understand that authenticity adapts. The deepest version of you is still subject to place. And the most dangerous places are the ones that make you forget you can leave. Some environments dull your senses, normalize your numbness, convince you that your shrinking is maturity, that silence is peace, that exhaustion is success. And when you're immersed in those worlds long enough, you lose your memory of wanting more. You forget you ever felt different. That's the final layer of the illusion. You don't just change what you want. You forget you ever wanted differently. But somewhere in you is a memory, a moment, a version of yourself that wanted something else, a whisper you've buried under 1,000 shoulds and musts, and this is just how life is here. And that whisper is still alive, waiting for new air. So ask yourself, are my desires mine, or are they location-based? What would I crave if I lived somewhere else, spoke another language, walked different streets, sat at different tables? Sometimes you don't need to fix yourself. You need to move the mirror, because you are not broken. You are just reacting to a world that taught you what to want. And maybe it's time to want something else. The repair instinct trap. You keep trying to fix yourself. Every book you read, every habit you build, every silent promise you whisper at night, it all carries the same message. Something in you is broken. You meditate to quiet the chaos. You journal to untangle the mess. You go to therapy, to the gym, to the altar of progress, hoping that one day you'll finally become whole. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, who told you that you needed to be repaired? This is the repair instinct trap. The quiet belief that your soul came defective, that your mind needs constant maintenance, that you, as you are not quite right. It doesn't always speak in cruelty. Sometimes it sounds like motivation. Sometimes it wears the mask of growth. But underneath the language of improvement is a deeper question. What if even the desire to change is not truly yours? From childhood, you were measured, graded, compared, told which behaviors were acceptable, which emotions were too loud, which dreams were too strange. You were corrected, reshaped, trimmed to fit the outlines of what the world called good. Praise became a currency. Approval was survival. And slowly, your internal compass shifted, not to point toward truth, but toward compliance. You learned to monitor yourself, to scan for flaws before others did, to internalize the whisper, fix this or they won't love you. So when the world later sold you improvement, as wellness, as productivity, as discipline, it didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar, natural, necessary. You called it your goals, your standards, your self-awareness. But beneath the ambition lived an inherited shame, a sense that something was always just a little off. Not enough. Too much. Wrong. This is how the trap works. You think you're healing, but sometimes you're just polishing the mask. You think you're evolving, but sometimes you're just moving the pieces of your self-hate into better lighting. You spend years trying to become someone your younger self never needed to be, just to meet the conditions placed on you by someone else's fear. Even the language of transformation becomes a cage. Work in progress. Becoming the best version of yourself. Unlocking your potential. All of it implies one thing. You are not enough today. You are a draft, a prototype, a fixer-upper. The person you are now is just the prelude to someone better, someone more lovable, more valuable, more deserving. But what if the instinct to repair is not rooted in reality, but in programming? What if your anxious striving is a survival response? What if your constant tweaking, refining, improving isn't coming from a deep, authentic calling, but from a long history of feeling unacceptable? Because the truth is, many of the things you're trying to fix were never broken. Your sensitivity, your pace, your body, your way of loving, your intensity, your quiet. They were just inconvenient to someone else. They didn't fit the mold, so they were labeled wrong. And once labeled, you carried the assignment like a debt, trying for years to pay it off through achievement, control, discipline, and change. This doesn't mean growth is a lie, but growth born from self-hatred is a slow poison. You build a beautiful house on a foundation of shame and wonder why it never feels like home. True healing begins not with improvement, but with interrogation. Not, how do I become better? But, who told me I wasn't already whole? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing. To stop fixing. To sit with yourself as is. To let the ache of imperfection remain unpolished. To rest. Not as a reward for progress, but as a declaration of worth. Not because you've earned it, but because you exist. And from that stillness, something strange happens. The noise softens, the pressure loosens. You start to hear a different voice. Not the panicked internal manager, but the quiet presence underneath. The part of you that was never afraid. The part that remembers you are not a machine, but a mystery. That voice doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't judge. It says, you are not broken. You are becoming aware. And that awareness is enough. That presence is the beginning of real change. The kind that doesn't come from panic or performance, but from compassion. So the next time you feel the urge to fix, to optimize, to self-discipline your way into worthiness, pause. Ask, who gave me this instinct? What part of me believes I must be repaired before I am loved? And what if I chose to believe the opposite? You may still grow, still evolve, still heal, but not because you are broken, because you are remembering, reclaiming, returning to a self that never needed fixing, only freedom.